Yeehaw! Praise the Lord and pass the moonshine.
Okay.
All right. Welcome to the Shannon Q and Antonio Fletcher. Let's talk about you after show.
Yeah, without
Stephen Gray here. Without Antonio or Shannon Q.
Yeah, they might drop by.
Shannon Q usually pops in sometimes, but we do this.
Oh,
Steve was there.
I was about to say, it's actually refreshing to see another Nova Scotian in these hangouts.
Only because you guys don't get the time zones confused.
True enough.
Yeah, people already commented because that video has 66 dislikes already. 66 dislikes.
A lot of people don't like it, Steve.
Download stuff. You know.
All right.
They hate Shannon that much. But anyways, so I'm just going to put my 2 cents in real quick if I can, and then turn it over to you guys. Because I'm going to be practicing guitar. I'm really trying to relearn after not playing for like 4 years, and it's killing my fingers. I don't have my calluses back yet. So, but anyways, so here's a couple questions that I want you guys to kind of help me out answering, because I don't think Antonio or Shannon even talked about any of this. Is that first, when you say you're pro-life, what does that mean? I don't think a lot of people know that if there's any specific definition of what pro-life means. When I hear pro-life, I mean that it doesn't mean that people want to go out and get abortions. That they were saying, oh, everybody should go out and get abortion. You're not pro-abortion. Pro-life to mean that you generally would rather have somebody carry your baby to term rather than have an abortion. But you can be pro-life and still, in my opinion, be fine with early first trimester abortions. Okay. I think there's a way to say, look, I don't think third trimester abortions are legit. I don't think there's a need for them. Obviously, in the case of the health of the welfare of the mother, fine. But I mean, if I don't think that a woman that goes through 8.5 months of pregnancy and this, you know what, I'm tired of this, I just want to kill my child. I don't think that really makes much sense to me. But when it's a bunch of cells and it doesn't even have any neuron activity of any kind, really, it's not really, any, it doesn't feel pain or anything, then yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, if one wants to terminate that point, that's fine. But I think there's a line of demarcation after a certain point where you say, you know what, I think that's off the table. That's just my personal thing, right? I think that's a good compromise, because I don't think either side is going to win at any given time. I don't think the person who says no more abortions is going to win, and the person who says, oh, abortions on demand is going to win either. I think there's going to have to be a compromise. That's just my 2 cents on it. So what do you guys think on that as far as what you consider to be pro-abortion? Where do you stand on it? And do you guys think that Antonio really made any points really?
I'll go first if the spackle doesn't mind. Okay, she's not interrupting, so I guess that means I can go first.
Yeah, you can go. You guys with penises insert anything anywhere.
You're a man. You can go first.
Well, he's gonna mansplain
to us, Max. Mansplain to us.
Well, as somebody who has actually turned down women and refused to put his penis in places, I'm proud to be the exception to that rule. Thank you kindly. But in any case, in terms of distinguishing the positions, I agree. There are people who have fairly nuanced positions. The most ardent on one side is no abortions from conception onward, and the more radical pro-choice side is abortion on demand anytime during those 9 months, up until the point that even if the fetus is viable outside the womb, as long as it's in the body, it can be aborted. Now, putting that off to the side, I think my own position would be one of the absolutes in those extremes, which would be upon conception. I really have no moral way to square out, anything in the middle. To me, it is an all or nothing thing, especially if it is based off of something like female autonomy. If a woman has an absolute right to her body and no other, and a fetus, and that entails that, of course, a fetus using the body to survive it, or continuing to use the body to survive doesn't negate that rule, then I think at any point she would actually have that right. I think the logic does follow there. In terms of knowing exactly when life begins, I think conception is probably where you're going to have to start. I think anywhere else in the middle seems kind of arbitrary to me. And in terms of just how Antonio went forward to debate pros and cons, because I'm trying to be fair, pro, he did at one point separate the religiosity from the moral claim. So he said that if it came to a point where I wasn't a Christian and I was an atheist, I'd still be pro-life. I would agree with that. I don't think the pro-life position is dependent upon the Christianity, which kind of upsets me when people are like, oh, well, God murders and stuff, and he's the absolute abortion. In my mind, I'm like, okay, let's just, you don't believe in God. Let's just step out of that for a minute. If I was to even concede God didn't exist, I'd still have a bit of a moral problem with abortion. And in fact, if I were to become an atheist, I think I would use those abortion arguments against the existence of God rather than, attacking the pro-life position. But that's just me.
Well, let me ask you real quick
On the bad side of what Antonio did wrong, I don't think he should have said giving birth is kind of a punishment. I thought that was in poor taste.
Yeah, that was probably a bad way to go, because I don't think that it should be, oh, well, somebody's punished for their actions. I don't think that's a good argument. But before I get to Dieter here, real quick, you said it was arbitrary. So why does it matter if it's arbitrary? We have things that are arbitrary all the time. Age of consent's arbitrary. Age of alcohol, arbitrary. We know there's no line of demarcation out there from some kind of, oh, that must be this way at this certain time. So what's wrong with posing an arbitrary time limit to say, okay, once there's a heartbeat, once there's brain activity, then no longer is it able to have an abortion?
Right. So I think there has to be a distinction between a legal and a moral aspect to this. In terms of a legal aspect here, I agree that at a certain point in time, an age of consent law is arbitrary. But from a moral standpoint, the reason why something is right or wrong, pertaining to sex and consent, is because people can vary at different times. Like if the person was, let's say, 15 when the age is 16, but at the same time somebody, I believe it's possible that somebody could have consented to that. That 15-year-old could have consented to sex in that time frame. But from a legal standpoint, it was still statutory rape. So there's that, and what makes it really tricky here is it pertains to something very important, which is not just a legal status, but a moral status of a human being. And that's kind of the point of issue here. I think when it comes to something so important as that, I think you're always better off erring on the side of caution here. If I was driving down the middle of the road and I saw some vaguely human-like shadow, I would stop, even if it was just an optical illusion, because better safe than sorry. If we are going to draw a distinction, and it is going to be arbitrary somehow, and it pertains to something as important as a human life, then it would be better to err on the side of caution, at least in that aspect.
Yeah, so you're against abortions under any conditions, or just? I want your position before I go to.
Okay. So when it comes to saving the life, of the mother, my position is, as long as there's a principle called the doctrine of double effect. I believe so. One can, if the life of the mother is at risk, and so is the life of the child, then the life of the mother is always preferred. When it comes to rape, and when it comes to rape, for instance, to me, I think it's again, to use that term, arbitrary whether that person is inside or outside of the womb. Let's say there's a baby who was literally born an hour ago. Now he was born as a result of rape. You could kill him or you could allow him to live. Versus, and the mother and after even giving birth seems to regret this, and she wants infanticide at that point. How is that any different from before, when it was 1 hour when it was 2 hours ago when it was still in the womb?
I agree with that. That's why I think, a third trimester makes no sense to me. Obviously, I think it's horrific what they do in order to perform those abortions. But Spackle's been waiting patiently. Thank you, Spackle. I know you're the only female in here, and I'm sure you're gonna be talking the next hour, which is fine. But I just wanted to get some points out there. Is that cool?
By all means, go.
Okay,
Go,
so
Spackle,
if
go.
you have a penis, stay out of the conversation. And I will just
We're all gonna mute. Just
2
go ahead.
hours. No, I'm kidding. So I do think it takes two to tango. But I do think
Or
that
three.
more,
Or three.
or a half dozen. I don't know. Depends on your lifestyle, I suppose. But
Don't judge.
you might need to take a paternity case in that, paternity test in that case and try to figure that out. But, no, like here's the thing, I think that the burden does shift mostly on women. Now, men can whine about financial ability in the state of California. Half is, your responsibility, and they can nail you for child support for 18 years, and then it's not even your kid. Oh my God. And there's a lot of, MRA stuff about it, but I still think that the most burden does fall upon the women when it comes to bearing a child. That being said, I don't think men shouldn't have a say. I've known men who desperately want kids and would make it happen. They would make fatherhood happen. They would support their spouse or loved one, and they still dealt with an abortion out of an abortion, I guess, inconvenience or convenience, abortion out of a more convenient situation. So I'm going to school and I can't handle this. I can't handle the extra financial pressure, that kind of abortion. It's one of those things where it is a heartache for some men. So I will acknowledge that. And I've seen that, sadly. But as far as where Antonio wins, obviously this is on his heart. This is all he cares about. He's obsessed with it. So if he cares so much about it, then I'm assuming that he thinks that human life is intrinsically valuable. And I call myself oftentimes a Christian humanist. And before you throw rocks at me and call me a heretic, or tell me that only atheists can be humanists, I want to tell you that I mean that in the 15th century way. Like, hello, Christian humanism is a thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think it's exclusive at all, and I don't think humanism is the sole thing of atheism whatsoever.
So here's the thing.
No problem with that.
I do believe that humanity is intrinsically valuable. And I shifted from a pro-life position that was pretty staunch to a pro-choice position. And now I think I'm honestly starting to shift back to pro-life. But here's the thing. You talked about that muddy in-between area, and that's kind of where I'm at right now, the muddy in-between area. Here's the thing. I might have some spiritual bitterness towards God, and I'll just let Christians throw rocks at me for that one. But I do believe that God allows miscarriages like crazy, it's some huge percentage of pregnancies. It's like 60%, 40% of pregnancies end in miscarriage, and it's usually before the first 20 weeks. In fact, it's oftentimes before you even realize you're pregnant. And so women endure loss of life constantly. It is a burden that we already endure, and many women find miscarriage to be grievous. And that's something to be considered of, I think, that most women are grief-stricken over miscarriage. Something tells me that intrinsically we want to value life, that we, the majority of us, Shannon said, that the majority of us women do not walk into an abortion clinic and stamp our frequent flyer card because we're sluts and we don't know how to, close our legs. It's most women who get an abortion, they are oftentimes not happy about it, and sometimes they deal with a lot of guilt and hand wrenching over the decision. I like that Antonio acknowledged that. I like that Antonio didn't say all women are sluts, and I appreciate that. So I can tell him that that's a win. Where I think think he really failed hard is when Deuteronomy, that passage was brought up, and Shannon brought up a very tough passage, and I brought that up to Nate Cunningham, and I did not like the results of that conversation. That's buried in the Nadia hangout somewhere. I was basically told I had no right to interpret it, and that we had to get a rabbi, pretty much.
With the people, let's put this in perspective. People that don't know Nate, that have not been around that long, because that's old school stuff.
Oh, it's old school stuff.
Yeah,
Old school.
Old schoolers. So
okay,
I mean,
I
think he gaslighted a little bit, or at least, well, I shouldn't say gaslighted. I don't know. He was different. He was different.
Right, yeah. So I ended up getting really emotional in that conversation because I felt like there was such a I don't care. I once had a conversation about abortion with Jesus DiCaprio, and I was on the pro-choice side at that time. And Jesus DiCaprio, if you don't know him, he's a Black Hebrew Israelite, and he told me that pregnancy is a punishment upon the woman. Like, if a woman gets herself pregnant, then she deserves the consequences of the pregnancy and must carry the burden of the child. Here's the thing. And Antonio, I'm working and weaving a web here to kind of bring you back to Antonio when he said that that chapter in Deuteronomy is a punishment, that if the woman's unfaithful, then hey, what? The baby dies. Who cares, right? It's like Gone with the Wind. Push Scarlett O'Hara down the stairs and let God sort out the rest at the end. I mean, Rhett Butler didn't, abort the child. That was God, right? Like it's sort of like this really strange. God suddenly becomes the grand abortionist, which you really have just submitted to right there in that apologetic. And then on top of it, you're saying that children are a burden and a punishment. And life isn't valuable. We shouldn't be pro-life because life is valuable, or the Imago Dei, you're made in God's image, but that we should be pro-life because people deserve to be punished for having sex out of marriage. And that's a big failure. And if you can't see that, please listen hard. This is why people say it's about control over women.
Yeah, I don't know why that was a good. I don't know how they make that into a good argument. Now, I think the passage in the Bible, I know of it. I don't think it was properly addressed. But how do you address it? I mean, what do you think? Because you're a Christian, how do you interpret it as a Christian of what it was? Because back then, I mean, I obviously, as I hate to say it, but I don't believe a lot of stories in the Bible. Obviously,
no.
Yeah, but I mean, that doesn't mean I don't believe there's a God. I don't believe there's God, but I mean, I want to word this carefully because you know how people are with me, right? But the story, you get it, Max. So, but the story of the whole thing in the Bible, it makes sense that a guy came up with that and said, "Let's do this," to exert some kind of control over the situation. I don't think that's far from the reality of being a possibility, right?
Well, I mean, consider what happens in the narrative. You have the notion that miscarriage can be procured from water with dust in it, if I'm remembering that correctly.
The temple dust. The temple dust.
I mean, if you're instructing Jews on how to do a ceremony, Jews who come from a very backward culture, then and they have an impetus or an anger at a cheating woman, and you're giving them water that isn't going to do anything, then
well, yeah, but the question is, do you think they thought God did intervene? They thought God would pass a judgment, right, and curse her if she had been cheating. As a religious person, do you think that's what it was, though?
No,
Because I don't believe that.
what I think it was God taking a backward people who have various inclinations to anger, instructing them by giving them a ceremony he knew would not produce any ill result on a fetus, as a way of pacifying their anger and giving them some way of knowing that the woman, or some way where they wouldn't think that the woman cheated at the end of the whole thing.
What happens if the person did have a miscarriage, just by nature? Nothing to do with the drink itself.
That is actually a good.
Then they would think she actually committed adultery. Now you could actually argue, well, God would not let that happen because God is all powerful. But I mean, you could throw that as any answer, right?
No. That is actually
It's stoning time.
No, that is.
Yeah, she probably would be stoned, right?
Well, actually,
Oh my God, did I make Max think for a change? This is the first time in like 3 years
no,
that's happened.
that is actually a good point. I hadn't considered that possibility. And so I'm actually going to have to say that is actually a monkey wrench thrown in my works here. But to Deidre's point, in judicial law, when that was prescribed, whenever stoning was a prescription, that wasn't a command. Therefore, you must stone. That was just Gavriel, who is a mutual friend of ours. He is a rabbi and he's very learned in the Jewish law. That was just the scope of what can be applied in such a scenario. Like, for example, we have a notion of mandatory and non-mandatory sentencing. The law can scope out, oh, this is the sentence you can give out, but it's not necessarily the one the judge must give out. Whereas there are other sentences where, no, you must give it out as such. If you look at how the Jewish oral tradition understands their own law, they don't understand it as mandating stoning. In fact, you would actually have to get a court of judges to approve it. And apparently they said a court who does more than one or two of these within their lifetime would be considered a blood court. First off, so even if, so I'd want to say actually in this case that even if there was a miscarriage, that the judges would not therefore conclude stoning. But yeah, it is actually a pretty interesting case that you brought up here. I'm still willing to stick to it, but only on the proviso that the court themselves would not be likely to therefore stone the woman, if that makes sense.
Spackle, do you hold the same thing? Do you think that this ceremony was given unto them by God?
I think that in ancient times people had idiotic ideas, and General Han Solo and I have talked about that. And well, he's a concordionist, and I don't think I necessarily am. I do see that society progresses, and the Bible shows that. And I think there's a lot of stupid laws that say, and the Lord says, and they're really just social laws or a rabbinical law that isn't necessarily part of the core of the Torah. I just think that there's indefensible things in the Bible. Slavery would be one. And I would say that you'd have to look at it. You'd have to look at it in the lens of the people. So I would look at it as look at the nearby laws. And if you look at the nearby laws, whether it's Babylonia or the Samaritans, things like that, the laws that they had about reproduction and what would happen if a woman crushed a man's genitals and all this stuff was so off the chain crazy. Right. When you compare their laws with the laws of the Hebrews that are struggling to become a nation, they're similar. And actually, strangely enough, as backwards as it might seem, they're more progressive than the other ones around them. Yeah. So that's kind of strange, right? Like you wouldn't think so, because looking back from our lens, you'd say, oh my gosh, what the hell's going on? But I would say that that there's just certain things in the Bible that are indefensible. One apologetic that I've heard, and I've struggled with this passage a lot. I think it's one of the hardest passages in the Bible, and the other hard one is the one with David and King David as the one that's the sinner, and he has an affair, and his son is born, and as an infant suffers and dies for 7 days as punishment for David's sin. And it's in the Bible. I think those two passages are so difficult and do not make sense, and they do not match up a pro-life image, that it's really tough, because the Bible one point says you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and then the next point, we have this going on. So it's so strange. So I would say, not nuance, but I'd look at it as a struggling people, trying to advance and grow. And I don't look at it as infallible, like this is a good thing to do. I don't think it's a mandate of goodness. And I also talked to some apologists that think that, like I have a friend that is a professor at Bethel West over here, and he thinks sort of like what Max thinks, which is if nothing would actually happen, that the ceremony would not actually cause something. But you do bring up a point. If there was a miscarriage, then she would appear to be unfaithful, and then
Right.
she'd end up stoned.
Right.
Possibly, maybe.
Possibly stoned. Yeah, it definitely would appear that that she cheated.
Possibly, but unlikely.
But it's really indefensible. I got an argument with Mac about this, and he's a gentleman that, if you haven't met, he's something else. I haven't seen him around lately, but he tried to tell me that it's literally the thigh. And it has nothing to do with the womb, and it's literally the thigh. But when we read literature in the Old Testament, we know that oftentimes when they're relating to the thigh or the feet, they're actually talking about genitals. It's what is the word? Euphemism? Is that the word?
Euphemism.
Yeah, if you read Song of Solomon, you'll see a lot of it.
So Father Eckhart of ETWN responded to somebody asking about this, and he says, "This text provides a means of determining the innocence or guilt of a woman accused of adultery by her husband in the absence of evidence. In the absence of details regarding how the bitter waters actually caused the effects which were threatened, we should not assume that it was merely physical, but rather something supernatural. Along these lines, the priests of the Old Testament and St. Peter are described in Acts as sometimes casting stones or some other forms of law to discern the will of God. This allows God to act in some supernatural manner to render a judgment in some aspects, such as the replacement of the apostle for Judas, or in this case, the guilt or innocence of the cursed. Scholars and translators debate the exact nature of the punishment for the guilty. Many suggest that the swelling of the body and the falling away of the thigh means her womb would become barren and subject to miscarriage in the future. In other words, she would never have children again, a curse in the ancient world. Some even suggest that the miscarriage might apply to any child she might have conceived already in the adulterous relationship. We know one case where God himself decreed that the offspring of the adulterous affair would die after childbirth, the first child of King David and Bathsheba. While this might seem unjust to us vis-a-vis the child, remember that each individual is judged by God upon death, and we trust that an innocent infant enjoys some manner of blessing in eternity, quite possibly heaven itself. Some suggest that the reference is to the womb and the loins, meaning the woman would become barren and her genitals would be disfigured and render future carnal relations impossible. Certainly, the threat of such a curse would be a discouragement to the sin of adultery, although the Bible does not record the application of this in any particular case. Other ancient peoples had similar tests for such things, though none known which were identical, and in the case of the passage, there would be the greater danger of superstitious understanding of such tests would be the case for Israelites who viewed this in terms of the judgment of God. So, I believe the response Father Eckhart is giving is related to a few things. One, if this was a test on the books, it's not one we have any evidence that it was actually tried. It might have been so discouraging nobody actually would have wanted to put their wife up for it. And if it was public and it came to terms, of course, this would be embarrassing for the man. So that is a possibility.
There's no record of it actually happening?
Not in the Bible, at least.
Okay. Is there any? Is it a little bit off the topic?
The Talmud talks about it more. The Talmud.
Yeah.
You'd have to really dig in there, which I haven't yet. But it does actually talk more about how the ceremony works.
Yep. Actually, another thing to consider is, as you yourself said, is that if it did work, if it was actually implemented, then then and it did result in the miscarriage, it might have, it would have been recorded, or at the very least, it would have been more apt to be recorded, because you actually do get instances where stonings are put in the law and recorded.
I know there were recorded events, and I was wondering, why that wouldn't be recorded. But at the same time, from what I understand, there's not really any evidence that even the Levitical Code was actually implemented. Is that correct?
Not true. So, for example, when you lit fires on the Sabbath, that was stoning was something which was seen as a possible punishment.
Sure. But I mean,
as a part of punishment, and all of them.
Yeah.
Not
just
right.
One, all of them. Because here's my question to you:
okay.
If there's a possibility, and I know you don't agree with it, but Spackle kind of thinks it's a possibility that if God didn't give the ceremony for this trial, and it was just because of their beliefs that because of neighboring country, or so they probably take things from what they did. And how do you apply it to the Levitical Code, which again, weird things like the combining of the fabrics or the selfish? Is it not possible that could not have been by God either, and that they just kind of came up with it with their own belief system? I mean, or do you think that it's all came from God?
Right. So yeah, so the argument here it seems that one is cherry picking which of the codes one wants to follow.
I'm not throwing out the charge of cherry picking. I'm actually it's a legit question. How do you know? For example, like Spackle says that the temple thing probably wasn't ordained by God. It's something they came up with. Well, when do you go throughout the Bible and say, yeah, this was probably ordained by God, but this is not? Could you make the argument just things relating to salvation and the rest? Who the hell knows? Or how does a Christian and do that?
So that is a good question. Some people say that it only applies to doctrines of faith, faith and morals, like the doctrine of the Trinity, or it's morally acceptable and not morally acceptable to do this and that. Some condense it even further to just doctrines of faith, like metaphysical ideas such as the nature of God and stuff. It really depends on the kind of person. Personally, I wouldn't throw out the charge that this wasn't inspired by God. My only point is that in this particular case, it was there specifically to discourage rather than implement, and we have no cases known where it was actually implemented, nor do we have any cases where nor do we have any reason to believe that God would not safeguard any women who were indeed innocent of any charge of adultery via some supernatural means, given the water itself has no natural properties to cause a miscarriage, nor of course from the fact that he could also intervene in any woman who has a miscarriage after taking the water. So that's another possibility too.
Okay.
So it doesn't strike me. So I don't think it. So while I am committed to the notion that in this particular case God inspired it, I don't think I'm committed to the notion that God did it for reasons to punish any specific woman, or that it actually, or such a punishment ever came to fruition. That I don't think I'm committed to. And I think that one can understand the purpose as being just preventive. So, yeah.
You guys want to add on that?
I think we're getting yelled at to move on because we've gone on and on about this, which is fine. But it is a hard passage, and I think it's funny because people are yelling because, like, you brought up the Bronze Age. We brought it up because Shannon brought it up, and because Shannon brought it up as a difficult passage to Antonio, and Antonio's response was pretty
odd,
pretty rough. Yeah.
I wouldn't think that would be the proper apologetic that he used. Now, I'm not a big fan of apologetics, but
the proper apologetic is that God can abort. So if your wife is cheating on you, you can push her down the stairs because you're not doing the abortion. God is.
That's basically
I think you would be doing the abortion in that particular case. You're just
No, but I don't
using
think
the
Tony would see it that way.
Wait, does he honestly advocate that you could push a woman down the stairs and say that
No,
wasn't
but I'm
causing?
saying to me that's like that. So to say that you can drink a potion
Right.
that may
It's
or
an
may not
analogy.
cause a miscarriage. Let's believe that the potion does. Let's say whatever they
Okay.
sprinkled in there was anti-baby killing dust, and
Right.
if you consume the anti-baby dust, you may or may not have abortion. It's like a 50-50, or a miscarriage, 50-50. That's an abortion. No matter
It's a
how
valid
you turn it.
argument. I see value in what she's saying on that. I see value when Shannon brought it up. I was like, this is a good point. I don't. This is where you avoid the consequentialism, and you can't go, oh, okay, well, if there is no miscarriage, therefore, no, the consequentialism doesn't matter. This one has to do with the intent. If you give something to somebody with the intent that it's going to cause an abortion, and then you're anti-abortion, I don't see how those reconcile with each other.
They don't. That's the point.
In the way that he made it
In the way he
reconciled, he
made
said
it.
that
Now, I'm not saying
God
there might be other ways
can
of doing it.
abortion.
But
Did he?
the way he was
well,
definitely doing it doesn't jive.
I see. Okay, maybe. Yeah. Did he say anything specifically about the water itself not causing it, but rather, the will of God doing this?
He didn't phrase it that way at all.
But I don't think it really makes much of a difference. The intent is you're going to have an abortion if I do X, whether if X is the cause of that or not. The intent is there, and then you say, well, I'm against abortions. Well, then you did something under the intent that it would cause an abortion, even though the end result was that it would not. See the issue there?
I think the response there, not Antonio's response, but I think the better response there would be that you're not providing the potion for the sake of abortion. You're
Inducement.
providing it for the sake. I'm sorry.
Let me stop you real quick because I'm going to try to argue this for you. You're going to say you're not providing the potion to do the inducement. You're providing the potion as per the ceremony, allow God to make judgment or not.
Yes.
And I think that's a cop out.
Okay, how come?
Because the end at that point, you still are saying that all you're doing is transferring ownership and onus from yourself and giving it to God, saying, well, you know what, it's not, I didn't do it, it's out of my hands. God is causing the abortion, but I'm allowing I'm allowing it to be judged. I'm allowing this ceremony to take place, the end result being the baby dies if God judges her.
All I did was put the baby in the oven. Moloch did the rest.
That's actually a funny
babies in the oven, it's always funny. Yeah, Max.
It is kind of funny in that particular case. So two things.
You make a good atheist. You make a good atheist.
Oh,
Moloch, if you don't know, Moloch was a god of that time where they did human sacrifices, and they put the baby in this little oven, and they would kill their firstborn. It was horrible.
Yeah.
I guess if I was Moloch, I'm guessing if I was Antonio.
Hey, he might be Moloch.
I'm guessing if I was Antonio, my response there would be to bite the bullet and say, yes, if Moloch was the true god of the universe, then that would be permissible. But because he was a false god, that's why it was immoral. Second off, when it comes to Steve's point, I don't think it's a cop-out in the same sense as when you defer something to somebody else. That's a cop-out. If you say, for example, I'm not really in the position to render a judgment given my terrible knowledge of the law, maybe I should render the judgment to an arbiter who is far more competent. Whatever he comes to, that's going to be the decision. Because, again, when you give the person the potion or the water filled with dust, you are not aware of the fact that they did it or not. You want God to show and reveal this.
Okay, so as a person giving it, do you think at the time they thought it was the water causing it, or they thought this was some kind of just symbolic thing?
Let's assume that it was. Let's assume that it was the water causing it for the sake of argument. If that was the case, then they know that the water is only causing this if it is the case that it causes an abortion. In which case, it's God who's rendering the judgment over whether or not she cheated or not. It's God making the determination. not
Okay, and
oneself.
I can see that, but then the only thing that kicks in there to me is I like you say, I bite the bullet on it, but then it kicks into me. Well, I don't like this where we can't do it, but if God does it, it's perfectly okay. Slavery, if God allows it, it's fine, but if we do it, bad. Or if God allows us to do it, then it's good. I don't know. It gets into that whole quandary of, oh well, hey, we could justify any moral action just by, oh well, God did it.
Yeah. So yeah, that is actually a response I get to. I have gotten before, but some people are actually in a better place or have more of a right over something than other people. So, for example, just use the life of a person or slavery as an example. And I might be playing my hand a little too much on this, given my upcoming debate. But why the hell not? I really hope Emperor Atheist isn't watching this. Um, if one is to look at a surgeon, for example, I know the precepts used to use this one, but it's actually a pretty good analogy. If I was to stab a baby in the heart, that's a little different than when a surgeon does the same thing. Mostly because there's
Well, no. I don't know. Surgeons go around stabbing babies in the heart. They perform operations. They don't go around stabbing a baby. Let's take a.
How about we just say in the chest then? Sometimes if you're doing open heart surgery on an infant,
stab it. I think they cut precision, but
okay, can I cut? Do I have? All right, but do I have that power? Can I just cut? Can I perform an incision on an infant?
Well, how about this? Are you authorized to do an operation as opposed to somebody who's gone through enough training to do it? No, we don't give you the empowerment to do that.
So we agree that there are people who have more of a power over something.
Absolutely. I think doctors do have a higher degree. Yes. We as a society have given them that ability. Yes.
Okay. So
what is a society? We have a societal compact that if a person has enough schooling and they demonstrate a proficiency, that they have a license to practice, then we have given them the empowerment to do that. Yes. It is based on society. That doesn't do it a higher power. God didn't say, hey, you went to medical school, you can cut into somebody.
Actually, if anything, that should give God more, not less of a reason. Why do we do that? It's just, why does a society need to give somebody permission like that? Well, it's because so we know that they are in such a position. If that surgeon was on a desert island where there was no society to confer this power onto him, and I think he would still be in the right to do this if it was just him and a baby that just managed to go somewhere. With him, I don't know how that particular result came about, but
a baby, he's lost his medical license. He's on a deserted island, but he's got a baby he's got to operate on. Is it moral to do so? Boy, we could come up with all kinds of different scenarios. Bet no one's ever done that one before. You know,
that it is a pretty rare one. But God is someone who's actually in a position where he knows all particular facts about any matter, and he is the creator and sustainer of the whole universe. So he's privy to facts that whole societies aren't even privy to facts on, and he's somebody who has ownership over our bodies. Not to mention ourselves. He is the creator. Now, before someone says, well, parents are also the creators of infants, they don't just get to do anything they want. And in response to that, I would just say that's not the case. Parents are only the creators of the material body, but underneath that matter that constitutes a person, that is God's creation, and therefore he gets primary ownership of over all human beings, and any subsequent autonomy is given on his privilege or his behalf. So there's that as well. So he does have. Okay.
Go ahead. Go finish it.
Oh, so he occupies a place of privilege in terms of both knowledge and as creator, sustainer of the universe, which makes him the de facto owner, who has right to distribute such things as ownership of body, as one example, and the ability for us to cultivate the resources he himself has created.
Okay, one last question. Then let's get Ocean here because he's been awfully quiet, and that's unusual for him. I don't know what's going on with him. Maybe he's not feeling well again, because he hasn't even said a word. It's just concerning. But okay, so Max, if back to the whole the ceremony thing,
right?
Do you think God, if somebody went through that ceremony, do you think God actually intervened and said, yes, this person didn't cheat, therefore they're not going to have a miscarriage, or this person did cheat and they're going to have. I'm going to give them a miscarriage. Do you think God actively was part of that ceremony?
I would have to assume so, because the other half would be that dusted water has no natural properties to do that. So
Or he
it's
gave us a
either
ceremony,
I'm sorry.
or he gave us a useless ceremony would be the other option.
Or he gave us a useless ceremony in which he doesn't preside over anything, in which case we might have a case where a woman accidentally miscarriages, in which case she has her own problems to deal with. Or the third one seems to be the most, how should I put it? The third one seems to be the most competent, which is have the ceremony and actually preside over it, and actually interfere only in times when there is a guilty party, and only in times when it is most prudent to have that guilty party punished in such a way.
Okay. One last thing. I'm just going to go by what I've seen in my own life in this day and age, that people come up with ridiculous shit. And because we have things like Peter Popoff's Miracle Spring Water, and because we have prayer mats, and because we have all this dumbass shit, I don't think it was any different back then. I think people just came up with this crap and ran with it. That's just my personal belief at this point. I'm willing to listen to arguments, but the only argument I have on it is, how the hell do you know the difference? How do you know Peter Popoff's Miracle Spring Water doesn't work and it gets you out of financial debt? I mean, come on. If you do, I believe that is bullshit, 100%. But
so I do have. So unlike
how do you know?
Well, there's
David.
Well,
how do you know? You go get some.
I don't have proof either way.
In terms of Peter Popoff, I could say that my proof is the only thing I have to determine whether it works or not is some kind of empirical evidence.
Oh, I don't need empirical evidence. I'll tell you right now, it's bullshit. Just straight up.
Well, I mean,
I go by the fact of the con artist.
Unless there's empirical evidence, I couldn't say one way or another. And since there doesn't appear to be any, I'd have to conclude it doesn't work. In terms of,
you're an evidentialist, really? You adhere to Clifford's principle?
Okay, so I am an evidentialist concerning some things, like in the particular case of Peter Popoff's Miracle Water, there is no evidence that there's no empirical evidence that works, because it's supposed to say, okay, here's my miracle water, and the effect is that it gets people out of financial debt. So since I don't see it getting people out of financial debt, and I have good reason to assume that it doesn't, especially because there are people who drink it and they go into financial debt, I can therefore conclude, qua modus tollens, that Peter Popoff's water is bullshit.
Yeah, no, I think that works too, but I don't think you really have to go that far. But anyways, okay. Sorry, Ocean, are you there? Did you? Ocean?
Yeah, I'm here. What's up?
Oh, you've been awfully quiet. It's disconcerting.
Can we check Ocean's gods for a change? I'm sorry, Ocean.
Yeah, sure. I don't have a whole lot to add on this, because it's.
How does your gods test for people that have been cheating?
We don't.
You don't care.
To say rock on.
How many of your gods have the swan?
Say what?
Oh, I was going to ask how many of your gods.
Go ahead.
How many of your gods raped while in disguise as a swan?
I think that's just Zeus. I'm not really a follower of Zeus, so.
We all hate Zeus. Zeus is a dick.
Fuck that guy.
Zeus is kind of weird, but no, the stories of the gods that involve cheating, it's not really shamed for the most part. There are a few stories of within legends of humans cheating, and it kind of depends on the context of the situation whether or not it's looked upon as a bad thing in those stories. So it's for example, Freya is she kind of sleeps around, and she has a husband, but they're kind of open, so it's not seen as like a bad thing when she's even confronted about it by Loki at a party, according to one story, where Loki just says that, you know, you've slept with a lot of people, and then her father actually comes to her defense and says, so what? What point are you trying to make? And I mean, that kind of reflects the attitude that the Norse had on adultery, is that it kind of depends on the couple. In some cases, it's seen as a bad thing because that's the nature of their relationship. In other cases, it's fine.
Yeah, I've always kind of seen it culturally. Oh, if a man cheats, it's fine. If a woman cheats, you know, execute her. That seems to be the general consensus.
I'm thinking about women in this case. With men, again, it kind of depends on the dynamic of the relationship. I was thinking about women specifically, since I think the question was geared towards women. But I think that it's actually kind of equal on both sides in that respect. There might be some higher standards for women in regards to cheating because of just the nature of wives. But
Ocean, I hate to interrupt you, but there's a technical thing I need to do here. Sean Huffer just went live, and I need to use my headset for something else possibly. So I need my name back. Is basically what I'm saying.
I'm going to be going here in a second, so I don't want to take over.
Does somebody want to take over moderating? Like maybe Holy Spackle?
I don't have the mods. Maybe Ocean.
Well, he already started the hangout, so if he has to go, then nobody can just kind of take over the hangout.
How
Which is
long
okay.
is
I
it
think.
going?
Oh God, we're almost an hour right now, so it's cool. It's cool.
But really quick, can I ask Ocean something?
No, I don't want to interrupt the whole thing. I just kind of wanted to. I mean, I would stay in here. I just wouldn't
made a
be
commitment,
available.
bro.
You made a commitment, bro.
Just
No, cool.
take out your phone.
Didn't make any commitment. I just was just trying
I
to
hear what
say
you're saying.
I'm going to be away.
Pass out mods. That's what you do.
That's what I'm doing.
But it will go off air if he leaves.
Yeah, you can't go off air. I would say just use your phone if you want to watch another thing.
No, that's what I'm doing.
That's what he said he's doing.
Oh, okay.
So just pass out mods.
So my question to Ocean is culturally though it looks really different. I mean, when you look at Scandinavians or whatever you guys were called back then, freaking Vikings. When you look at Vikings, it's all rape and pillage. Like they're expansionists that way, sort of like Romans. Yeah, like
weren't expansion.
I will probably be back though.
Okay, they took what they wanted. They populated themselves. They didn't care about that. And then they went back home. Okay, so I guess they're sort of pirates, but
I mean that's with respect to Vikings, which is like a specific group within Norway or within among Scandinavians. They were the raiders. But then if you're looking at the culture in general of the Norse, then that's, you know, they're not all Vikings, right? Even though many living among them might be Vikings.
So
there was raiders, and then there were the rest of the population.
My point is culturally, though, I don't think you guys were you guys just like I'm druids, right? So I'm team druid and you're team. Culturally,
genetically I'm both, but you know.
Culturally, it seems like the Jews, the ancient Jews, were obsessed with lineage and keeping their lineage separate from everybody and pure early on, and that was because they were establishing their tribe. It doesn't seem like, from what I've read, that the Norse are that way.
As far as keeping track of lineage, I mean, they did, but
not keeping track of it, keeping it pure and separate.
Well, why do you? So, I admit there's definitely a difference. I guess I don't know why you would hold that in such high regard as trying to keep anything pure. What is pure really?
It's not high regard, but I think it's why it's such a hyper focus on who has whose baby. If that makes sense.
I mean, there was a
explains the tribes
baby in the Norse culture, but it wasn't a like. It was more about individual, like you were the son of so and so, or the daughter of so and so. Like even their names, Freydis Eriksdottir, or Leif Erikson, That's their brother and sister. They're both the offspring of Eric the Red, and their names would state such. You are the son or the daughter of this person. So I mean, lineage was important in that respect, as far as an individual aspect. But as far as like keeping the whole tribe pure, wasn't a concern of theirs. People would immigrate and leave all the time.
In the Old Testament, and I'm saying like the focus of the tribes, the ancient tribes of Israel versus what you're describing is just interesting if you're to compare the focus on what the tribes are of the little bit I've read of the Norse versus the tribe of Israel, but Israel seems so focused on keeping themselves separate. They're so focused on it. They have rules about what to do with their semen and where to spill it. They're circumcised, and they care about what you do with your genitals, and they care about who you take as a wife and who you can intermingle with and have children with, and take on as a wife. And it's so hyper focused on what they want to do is establish that particular themselves as a nation, basically. And I don't think the Norse are that way, and so their gods aren't that way either. And I just think about it in the way that we view God, right? So to me, the hyper focus on sexuality kind of makes sense if you think about their goal.
Oh yeah, I don't know if it's I don't understand why it's something that's necessary or needed, I guess. But it's one of the reasons why I would get frustrated with the Christian/Jewish God, is that it had all these concerns that seem superfluous to me.
Well, actually, I think the concern is understandable. Consider the fact that the Jews are commanded to be undefiled in terms of intermixing with foreign nations because they observe and worship foreign gods. And if the main crux of the Jewish moral religion is monotheism, then you want less, and then your population less susceptible to that, or as little susceptible as that is possible. That's why they have their own mode of rules as well. It was so, for example, when Jews circumcised and when they dieted, the whole point of that was to separate themselves from the nations. The same, of course, would apply in terms of who you marry. That's why Jews couldn't marry outsiders. So it was a way of essentially keeping their religion alive, which it worked.
Sure. I mean, I see what their goal is, and it's like, if you're looking at it as being consistent with what their goals are, as Holy Spackle's pointing out, then sure, it would make sense for their goal. I just don't understand the reason for the goal, I guess. Like, I get the stated reason that it's like I don't see why it's necessary to keep everybody pure. It's just strange to me.
You mean a polytheist thinks monotheism is strange? That's odd.
Yeah, no, big surprise, right? Yeah, we're from the perspective of the polytheist, is the idea of other gods being kind of involved in the religion from foreign sources isn't weird. Like, it didn't cause anybody to bat an eye. That's why we have like ideas of gods kind of moving from culture to culture as they would get exposed to one another. Apollo, for example, is probably Gaelic or Gaulish, rather, a Gaulish god. So, like, sourced from, if you wanted to go the lineage of the idea of Apollo, or the exposure of Apollo, would have been from Gaul into Greece.
That's interesting, because if you read, I'm trying to remember what the name of the. Have you ever read Aristophanes' The Birds?
I have not.
So Aristophanes' The Birds is a pretty interesting satire. Apparently, in this book, a few birds gain consciousness. Well, a sorceress turns a few human beings into birds, and they essentially get the other birds to speak and talk, and they form their own community called Cloud Cuckoo Land. And in Cloud Cuckoo Land, they steal the power of the gods by creating a city in the sky where they take the prayers of mortals. They use the power themselves from the gods. And when the gods want to negotiate like a treaty, the birds take advantage of them because Poseidon, Hercules, and barbarian gods come down to Earth. And it's interesting because in this work, the barbarian gods are portrayed as idiots. And the Greeks actually had no problem recognizing that there were other gods. So I'm kind of curious as to why they would have had to make someone like Apollo Greek when they could have just kept him, a part of the other.
When was this written?
Oh, it was. So Aristophanes was a contemporary of Socrates, just to give you some idea.
Okay. I think that at that point, Apollo would have been established as a Greek idea at that point. The idea about Apollo, as far as I know, is it would have been a ridiculously long time ago. But there's other
does make sense.
There's other gods in Gaulish mythology and pantheon that are very similar to Greek ideas, like Kronos and Pan are very similar, and then they might be kind of crossovers of one another.
Well, actually, that
the
would make
idea
sense.
might have moved over.
Well, I mean, that is actually sensible, considering the fact that they are killed, they are imprisoned by the Olympians. So it would be the Greeks triumphing over, in a sense, the old gods, which would be very humiliating to these other civilizations. It would be like saying, yeah, your gods might be older, but our god triumphed over your gods. Hence our work here.
There's a lot of conversation of god competition. Even I think that, I don't know if this is the case with the Judaic god, but I think that the Assyrians and the Babylonians were really big into the whole god competition thing, where if they won, it was meaning their gods would actually conquer the gods of their opponent as well.
That is accurate, and it's really interesting because I was watching a secular, by secular I mean I want to say it was Harvard or Yale. It was a lecture that was linked to me. I think Floyd linked it to me, and it was interesting because they were talking about that very same thing. They were saying that wait, can you jog my memory real quick, because something happened that just distracted the
We were
heck
talking
out of
about
me.
god competitions, and you were talking about the historical.
Yeah, god competitions and how you would adopt. So you'd lose to another tribe or a neighboring nation in battle, and then you would have to adopt their gods and pay tribute to their gods.
Right. And your gods became their devils.
And
your gods literally became their devils, like Pan became,
right. So what's interesting? What's interesting?
Apollo is a very reverent, highly revered god.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying Apollo, but
what's interesting with the Jewish people, though, is they kept holding on to their god. So they would idolatry, and then they'd come back, and they'd idolatry, and then they'd come back, and that actually is supported by secular scholars who do take a look at that and think it's a little bit unusual for a group to come back from Babylonia and then reject Baal and go back to Yahweh. So it is kind of interesting to me that they have this love affair that's in and out, and that kind of makes them different.
So so there's actually an interesting passage in the Psalms about how God actually has a council, and of course in this council are other gods. I think it's interesting because in the ancient Hebrew there was just really a notion of powers, and essentially the only God worth worshiping was the highest of the powers. Now, to say monotheism would be not to say that you only worship one God, but rather not that you only recognize one God, but that you only recognize one God who is worthy of worship. Thus, when you worshipped another God, you are committing some form of immorality, as it were.
You're suggesting that Christianity is henotheist, like General Han Solo does?
Yes and no. Asserting, I don't think it is henotheistic because I don't think that these gods are of the same ontological status. Whereas I think henotheists would want to say that there are, that they are. So, for example, I don't consider God to be one being among a lot of other beings who's just the most powerful of all of them. I think God is, I think God is what Thomas Aquinas called being itself, or Duns Scotus would call it infinite being, or um, St. Anselm would call it that which none greater can exist. The idea is that God has such an ontological status that he's really in a set of one, not just for moral reasons, but rather for ontological or metaphysical reasons. That in principle there could be no other being like him. This is kind of the notion of divine simplicity.
I'm familiar with some other. There's polytheistic concepts of groundness of being. There's a recent one is Aletheia. Some of the older ones might be Chaos, Yggdrasil, or Gaia.
I mean,
but
Aristotle himself was both. Aristotle himself was a polytheist and a monotheist in my sense. So Aristotle thought that there was one prime mover, yet at the same time he reckoned he didn't think there was anything immoral about worshiping the Greek pantheon. He just didn't think many in the Greek or any of the Greek pantheon were the prime mover.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
He might actually. I mean, I don't know if the idea of chaos was around at the time of Aristotle, but I don't know if he would actually consider chaos the groundness of being. That actually might have some consequences. But
it was around, and he considered that prime matter or pure potentiality. You know, something which. So he
chaos
has this,
is definitely pure potentiality, which is the reason why I was wondering whether or not it was around.
Yeah, it was. So
I know what he's arguing for when it comes to prime mover, as far as like groundness of being. I don't know if it would have originated from chaos. Maybe there's even some. I've heard some suggestions that Judaism had chaos as an older being than God at some point along the lines, but I don't have validation of that. There's been some studies into Jewish polytheism, but I have a book on it, but I haven't really poked at it yet.
No worries. When it comes to Aristotle, he thought that there was chaos, and chaos was pure potentiality, but and he thought the prime mover was pure actuality. So something which was in principle changeless, and particular beings and entities such as ourselves that are in one sense potential and one sense actual, that there's something about us which is consistent and permeant, and something else about us which is dynamic and changing. We are kind of an admixture of these two. And basically, there is no pure potentiality which exists on its own, but rather it's always existent through some form or some mode of permanence. But if there was no pure actuality or prime mover, then chaos would just be nothingness. It wouldn't have any existence of its own. It would just it would have nothing to be understood in reflection of or in contrast to. And he thought that if pure existence only existed, that it would be inert. It wouldn't have anything to bring into existence. So he said because of this, there is an eternal universe where there was just the prime mover bringing things into and out of existence. And it required both of them. So he's very dualistic. Whereas if you look at...
So he's saying the prime mover would have started chaos?
He's saying the prime mover sustains chaos in existence.
I want to read where he's talking about this. If you want to send me a link or something.
Yeah, it's called the Metaphysics. You could see it. You could find one on MIT here.
So on a
All right,
side
I'll find out
note,
in a minute. This is really interesting.
I've become friends with a Hindu, and I've only known one other legit Hindu before, and not somebody that dabbles in it, but like was born in India and stuff. And it's really interesting because I always thought Hinduism was considered polytheism to some degree, just with selected favorite gods like Shiva and maybe like Kali and I forget all the other names. The elephant lady.
Shiva,
Or guy.
Shiva, Kali, Vishnu, Hanuman is pretty cool.
Krishna. Yeah, so I thought like these are polytheists, but actually, yeah, I was told that it's both poly and mono. Poly in the sense that all these are aspects of the same God, the same being, which
They're
is
avatars of him,
yeah.
and that there's some of the best speeches that I've heard on understanding Hinduism. That's like really, it's dumbed down, and then it not only is it dumbed down, but it actually goes deep into it. Some speeches by Alan Watts on Hinduism, where he builds a compare and contrast between atheism, Christianity, and Hinduism, and goes into the structure of all of them as far as like their views of the universe and then their views of God all at once. Where he refers to his different models of the universe. He refers to Hinduism as the dramatic model. He refers to atheism as the automatic model, and Christianity as the ceramic model. So the ceramic model is you have God the maker, God the creator, and God the king. And then with the automatic model, you have the universe that has started itself, basically. And then with the dramatic model, you have a universe that is the imagination of a God playing out all the roles of what's happening between everybody. So he's playing a different part and convincing himself that he's in all of these roles, including humans and animals. So
Wait a second. Is
he
this
might
guy actually saying you're wrong?
say what?
Is he actually
The guy
saying
in
you're
live
wrong?
chat says we're uneducated. I mean I do admit I'm uneducated. I used to consider it polytheism, but I'm told by a Hindu that that's not the case. So I think that's interesting.
He's
I never
saying
made
you're
any claim.
mingling the. He says you're mingling the triumvirate and the lesser and Bodhisattva. I had no shit about how to even say this. So, Bodhisattva, when talking about Hindu deities, guys,
To be fair,
He's pointing out that there are multiple ideas of Hindu, which is true. I mean, there's you have the ideas of Hinduism in the north and the south, for example, as far as just one division that you can create are distinct between one another, but they consider each other Hindu. And then there's also cults of like individual gods.
Right.
But
Buddhist
what I'm
Buddhist-
referencing is Alan Watts, who was speaking generally about the beliefs of Hinduism, which all of them are going to be holding the position that that there is one great god, Brahman, that plays the roles of all these other things. It's a Vedic tradition.
From what I understand, that's consistent among all forms of Hinduism, is that they believe there's a division between, well, all orthodox modes of Hinduism, is that they believe there's a distinction between the Atman and the Brahman. Buddhists reject this. They think that the Atman is illusionary, but the Atman is one's soul and one's own being, and the Brahman is the all and the everything, anything that's pretty external to you. And of course, the whole point of Hinduism is achieving nirvana, ending reincarnation, and that's done through through a union of one's Brahman and the Atman. Whereas Buddhists think that it's basically denying any desires and hence denying that there is even such an Atman.
Okay.
Now,
can I respond to that real quick?
Just a minute. Random guy on the side live chat, was what I said uneducated or wrong? I'm open to criticism here.
Yeah, as am I. If you find something wrong, then great.
I'm open to getting an actual Hindu believer in here. They're hard to find in
Yeah.
our great debate.
Do you want to come in? We can get you a link. Secret
My
Slack.
understanding on Hinduism comes from reading a bit about it and having a lot of Hindus in my family, talking with them about it. So it's I have a background with it, but I'm not a Hindu myself.
My best friend is a Hindu. She's someone who's pretty close to me, and yeah, I've talked about it with her from time to time. Mostly, we like the myth. Mostly, we like to discuss the myths as opposed to the theology. She thinks the whole dramatic myths behind the whole thing is far more interesting than the metaphysics. So that's generally what we discuss. By the way, what is the commentator's name?
Secret
Me?
sock account.
Super secret sock account.
Super secret.
Anyway,
It's,
my understanding of the Atman versus the Brahman is that they're seen as distinct, but at the same time, my understanding is that most Hindus believe this, that the Atman is the Brahman fooling itself into believing that it is separate and playing the role of someone else, and that you as an individual are fooling yourself into or creating an illusion for yourself so that you can have experience without being all powerful, or without being everything. But that a fun part of the journey of being separate and fooling yourself can be coming out of that illusion, which is what your meditation and yoga and all that jazz is supposed to be about.
right. Yeah. So, I mean, how distinct or how unified those things are can vary from Hindu groups specifically. Some are more pantheistic than others. Others can be monotheistic. It all really depends. But mostly Nirvana comes, whatever way you look at it, is away from denying that one can attain any kind of happiness from the Brahman, and that it lies in some kind of unity with it, be it mental, spiritual, ontological, whatever.
I'd love to get a Hindu in here to actually have the conversation. I think that
I think
I know a bunch and I've talked to them about it, but I don't. It's definitely not something I'm as informed on as my own religion or even Christianity. Honestly,
Why is it
religions that are outside of my religion?
Why is it that we don't tend to have a lot of Hindus in these conversations? Is it because they're not evangelical? And
no, from what I've seen of them, they're not really interested in debating religion. At least there's when you get into areas that are very much Hindu, you get into there's a lot of fights between Hindus and Muslims, especially around Pakistan. But it seems like they just don't want to fight about it. Which is fine. It's respectable enough.
Apparently, there were quite a handful of Hindu apologists during the British colonial period, where the British were looking down on Hindu intellectuals, so they had to develop some kind of defense of their religious belief.
They don't have the rhetorical tradition that Britain has, and then you get that interaction. Well, now you got to start right. So,
sometimes they'll latch onto things like quantum physics. I know Deepak Chopra isn't primarily a Hindu apologist, but he kind of incorporates a lot of spiritualistic Hindu ideas with quantum woo. Another guy actually, from what I'm reading on Wikipedia, his name is Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I know I'm mispronouncing that name, but apparently he tried to make similar correlations with it too.
Are you talking about Michio Kaku?
No,
Okay.
this is the guy I'm talking about.
Stardust is the nature of rebirth, and of us, intention requires exploration.
In Deepak Chopra generator, correct?
No, I'm
Oh,
reionizing
fuck.
my electrons right now.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
I can see why you had trouble saying that.
The goal of resonance cascade. Oh, wait. The goal of a resonance cascade is to plant in the seeds of understanding rather than bondage.
I'm pretty sure you're quoting from the generator.
No, this is a generator, but it's the new age bullshit generator. It sounds like Deepak Chopra though when you read it. It produces an article for you, and it has a nice little picture of nature on it when you read it. I'll post a link in the side chat, and there's a button that says reionize your electrons.
Oh, I see.
Click that button
Well,
and it gives you a new article.
Well, the Higgs boson does illuminate formless timelessness.
You know, in Shannon Rocky's community, with the philosophy of religion, there's a little more of a grab bag than the other debate communities I've been into. There's a bunch of preachy Islamics, which is interesting, and they usually have to get reeled in by the moderators. And then there's a Satanist, and like, you know, that's like finding like a shiny button here, because usually an actual Satanist, a real one, is hard to find. And then there's I don't know if anyone's announced themselves as a Hindu though. Like they are not really present online, I'm telling you.
When you say Satanist, do you mean a one who believes in the existence of Satan, or do you mean like one of those atheistic Satanists who are just
Atheistic
edgy?
Satanist, yeah.
Okay, so
Atheistic.
edgy teen lord, got it. Actually,
I think Satanism is secular humanism with some edge to it. Like I think it's hedonism and humanism merged together.
I would agree with that.
yeah, I mean, edginess is edginess, in my opinion. In any case, even Anton LaVey wasn't doing what he did for the sake of humanism. Like, if you read,
Anton LaVey was a troll.
Oh, he was. No, but if you actually read his
He was the
book
original troll.
if you read his book, the Book of Satan, one of I think that the Satanic Bible. He actually says that it is permissible to to cast enchantments on women and use magic to get them to have sex with you. So, in essence, magic rupees.
You are being a quote miner. You know that, right? You're totally quote mining that book.
The reason I ended up quote mining it was you know that meme where it says the Bible condones rape, the Quran condones rape, and the Satanic Bible does not condone rape, and thus it was better than all the others. I actually went through the Satanic Bible, seeing what it said about rape, and looking at its sexual ethics, and I found that, and I'm like, oh, what the shit? Did the person make that meme without even reading this? Here it is. It's condoning rape. So if you're going to talk shit about
not
holy
rape either, though.
It's
because if you look at it the way they view magic,
rape.
it's not roofie.
Okay,
though.
what's the difference between me casting
if you read what they say, right, and they say that magic is natural, basically, is what they say in there.
That's bullshit. That's bullshit. So is the chemicals in a roofie. That's also natural.
They out admit it. They don't believe in magic, though. You ask a Satanist if they believe in it's real magic.
Well, no, they said the meme said the Book of Satan condones magic. It doesn't. I never made any claims about particular Satanists.
This is where we need Tyler Durden. Tyler Durden claims to be a Satanist. If you're actually a Satanist, come on in. We need to talk to you about magic and roofies.
Tyler Durden.
I've read the Satanic Bible. That's about as far as I got.
Let's see.
there's definitely stuff in the Satanic Bible that suggests magic belief, but not in a supernatural sense. It's more of a therapeutic mental sense. Which is
It
fine.
says a sexual ritual is what is commonly known as a love charm or spell. The purpose in performing such a ritual is to create desire on the part of the person whom you desire, enchantment for self-aggrandizement. When accompanied by ceremonial magic, falls into the category of either compassion or the destruction ritual, or possibly both. If you want or need something so badly you are sad or feel much anguish without it, without causing hurt on another part, then this would incorporate a compassion ritual to increase your power. If you wish to enchantment or trap a deserving victim for your own purpose, you would employ a destruction ritual. These formulas are to be adhered to, as applying the wrong type of ritual toward the desired result can lead to a trouble of a complicated nature. A good example of this is a girl who finds herself plagued by a relentless suitor. She has done little to encourage him, then she should recognize him for the psychic vampire he is, let him play his masochistic role. If, however, she has enchanted him frivolously, giving him every encouragement, and then finds herself a steady object of sexual desire, much to her dismay, she has no one to blame but herself. Such exercises are only ego boosts, born out of indoctrination of ego denial, which makes these little bewitchments necessary. So there you are, full context.
Tyler is asking if someone's dumb enough to believe that they believe in magic.
I mean, it is something that the Satanic Bible is pushing. So, if it's not something, I'm not saying that I'm not saying Satanists believe in this. No, not all Satanists. I'm only saying that
Tyler
the Satanic Bible is encouraging this.
Tells us to let you read page 61 regarding sexual ethics and consent if you have the standard version.
So the anti-rape verse does say, if you attempt to impose your sexual desires on others who do not welcome your advances, you are infringing upon their sexual freedom. Therefore, Satanism does not advocate rape, child molestation, sexual defilement of animals, or any other sexual form of activity which entails participation of those who are unwilling or those whose innocence or naivete would allow them to be intimidated or misguided into doing something against their wishes. My point, no, I fully recognize that verse. My contention is that in a sexual,
sounds like a disclaimer.
My contention is you don't when you're doing something under
pointed out magic rituals are pageantry. SSA
yeah, when you're doing,
pointed out.
When you're using some form of pageant, well, when you're using some form of magic to get somebody to
because I got it, that was all about the psychodrama. It was all about like, okay, it's about the person invoking the ritual,
it's a show,
as it were. It's a show, right? It's about the person, and it gets rid of their.
It's theatrics and it's therapeutic.
No,
it's therapeutic, right? It's in their head game, basically.
It's like that part in Interview with a Vampire where they offer up the naked chick that looks like Amy Grant and then they all eat her.
You can't use a form of magic to do anything because magic isn't real. If it actually had an effect, it wouldn't be magic. That's
okay.
Kind of the point.
Whether magic is performed for constructive or destructive purposes, the success of the operation is dependent on the reality of the person who is to receive the blessing or curse. As the case may be, in the case of a sex or a compassion ritual, it helps if the recipient has faith and believes in magic. But the victim of a hex or a curse is much more prone to destruction if he does not believe in it. That's also from the Satanic Bible too. So apparently for a book that doesn't hold that magic is a thing, there are degrees of where magic works best or not, which I find fairly silly as a defense.
If it's theater, that's how it's supposed to be performed.
My question is then, if it's an altering of someone's mental state, Does that in this particular passage, does it say that person consents to it? Like, did they go and say, yes, alter me?
Nope.
Okay, so if you're performing something that you know is going to psychologically alter someone purposefully, is that moral? Interesting. I don't know.
And I don't read anything in this about magic being purely a theatrical thing.
Well, it'd be
Oh, wait,
nice if
actually,
Tyler
oh,
could
wait,
come in
oh,
because
oh,
this is
here,
getting a little bit
oh,
hard
wait,
to. Yeah, you
be-
can read.
He's at work, he says.
My
Yeah.
understanding of Satanism's magic is it's always been theatrical and therapeutic.
Okay, so here it is. Instead, I found a common sense, rational, materialist philosophy along with theatrical ritual techniques meant as self-transformative psychodrama. Here was a tool perfectly suited to my nature as a means of getting the most out of my life. I knew that atheist, quote unquote, was no longer sufficient as a designation for myself. This book led me to meet and befriend LaVey, working with him. Okay, so that's the introduction by Magnus Peter Gilmore. So that's not done by the author of the book. That is done by someone who is giving a commentary on the book itself. So what the author of the intro is implying here is how he sees it is not necessarily an intro which is written in 2005, by the way, is not what LaVey
Read
might
the
be
forward, he says.
playing. Okay, let's see.
Gilmore is the current high priest of the Church of Satan.
He's the current high priest, but he's not the author of this book.
But he was a close friend of LaVey.
LaVey.
True, but I want to look at but I'm looking at what the text says. When the carnival season ended, LaVey would earn more money by playing organ in Los Angeles, carry burlesque houses, and relates this to that it was during this period that he met and had a brief affair with a then-known Marilyn Monroe after accompanying her chain-dragging striptease at the burlesque theater. Oh, sorry, that's not about
Wait,
it.
hold on. Why are you looking at the text and trying to hold the text above what the high priest is saying?
I'm just reading the text. I can cite you. So,
Why are you holding above what the high priest would say?
I'm reading what it says.
If it's saying something,
if
you're interpreting it differently than the high priest.
I press Control and F, and I searched where it said psychodrama. The place where I found it was in the introduction. I didn't find. Now, where I read my quotes regarding sexual morals was first the quote regarding how Satanism was about consent was, let's see, page 38, but page 64 is where I read about about rituals, sex rituals, and hexes.
Right. But if Gilmore is saying that the rituals are psychodrama and theatrical, then, and he's the current high priest of the church, as well as a close friend of LaVey, do you think that maybe that person would understand what the text is expected as being interpreted as?
That is a fair point. Okay, so here it reads, in the Church of St. LaVey initiated clever psychodramas that would enable a group of flesh worshippers to overcome the repression and inhibition fostered by the Judeo-Christian tradition. He knew that the old concept of a black mass to satirize Christian services was outmoded. Okay. So, see, there's the psychodrama part.
On top of that, Satanists are not sola scriptura type as far as their religion goes. The Satanic Bible is not meant to be taken as the word of God or something.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, that is also a fair point too.
Right.
My response
Nobody ever
was
said Anton was going to live forever or anything like that.
right. So, just to go back to what I was responding, the reason I brought it up was to say that this is what the Satanic Bible itself seems to put forward, or at least, no, I shouldn't say seem. So I was responding. The reason I dredged this up was because I had actually seen a meme where it says the Holy Bible says this, Quran says this, the Satanic Bible says this. If it's not meant to be taken as a holy book, I'd understand. But clearly, at least the person who penned this meme is making that suggestion. And second of all, while I do agree that most Satanists do not believe that such a book means or entails that magic exists, there is the fact remains that LaVey didn't believe that there was anything immoral about these hexes. That seems to be the key issue here. Now,
There's nothing immoral with what?
With casting, there's nothing immoral about hypothetically casting a hex wherein a woman would be unable to resist you.
He didn't believe that that was the case. Satanists don't believe that that's the case.
True, but even if it's not the case, even if they don't believe such a state of affairs exists, they still believe that it would be hypothetically moral. Like, I could pick up a Harry Potter book, and I could say, okay, this is moral, and what Voldemort is doing is immoral. Now, whether or not Voldemort exists doesn't mean that what he does is immoral to the kids of Hogwarts. But if I was to pick it up, but if J.K. Rowling was to say, well, what Voldemort did was pretty okay, I'd be like, yeah, I think you're wrong about your own universe. Sorry, lady.
That's the link from Tyler in the outside chat.
Yeah, I just posted. I'm looking through the FAQ.
Yeah.
He said to check number 8 and number 10 about. Damn it, I missed it. There it is. Sexuality and gender. Does it accept transgender people? Sure.
Which part am I supposed to look at? Theory and practice, affiliation.
FAQ.
Thank you. And what did he say? Number
Tyler,
8?
I don't know if you expected their questions to be answered.
See number
but
8.
I don't see an answer.
Number 8 and number 10.
Yeah, number 10 is really short and doesn't really address the issue that we're discussing.
So what are you getting out with 8?
Not getting very much out of 8 either.
There's nothing about hexes in 8.
But it does suggest, if you look at what is satanic ritual as far as the question, the answers suggest that it's it's basically meant as self-transformational psychodrama. So if something is meant to be self-transformational psychodrama, and then there's some kind of love hex or whatever, that's just a performance. People are consenting to be involved in the ritual. No one's forcing you to be involved in a ritual in the Church of Satan.
Right.
So it says here, if, however, she has, let's assume it is a psychodrama. It says here, if, however, she has enchanted him frivolously, assuming the enchantment is supposed to be carried out in the context of the psychodrama, giving him every encouragement, and then finds herself a steady object of sexual desire, much to her dismay, she has no one to blame but herself. Sex exercises are only ego boosts, born of indoctrination, of ego denial, which makes these little bewitchments necessary. So it seems that there's at least a little victim blaming going on here, and pressuring if, on the off chance, she was just being a tease. Like, I agree, woman who...
What are you reading? I don't know what are you reading right now?
Oh, what I'm reading is, go to page 64 of the Satanic Bible. Would you like me to actually just copy and paste the full text of the Bible and just have you read it?
I don't paste it into the side chat. it'll fucking bog us down. That's not a short book, but if you want to, are you looking at a PDF?
I am not, but I have. Here it
I have a
is.
copy of the book. I just don't want to get up and go get it.
Oh, so there's the link, and you could Control F. She has no one to blame but herself. You find it?
Yeah. I don't understand the point of you bringing up this.
Didn't I tell you it was in the context of responding to a meme?
This isn't this isn't describing a ritual. This is describing human behavior.
Right. You do understand what a psychic vampire is in this context, right?
I
That's
assume
just-
the
Psychic vampire
assume-
in the context of the Satanic Bible is someone who takes energy out of your life without actually giving you anything of value. As far as the friendship goes, it's just somebody who's like a friendship that's very parasitic. Or any sort of relationship that's parasitic. It's not like describing some sort of magical being. And when says she has enchanted him frivolously, that means that it's if she's being flirty. Every encouragement to find himself the steady object of sexual desire, much to her dismay, she has no one to blame for her but herself. So that means if she's like leading him on, and he's being relentless, and she's trying to figure out how to get this to stop. Maybe the fact that she's flirty is part of the problem. Flirty with this individual. Let's see. Born of indoctrination of ego denial. Makes these little devotions necessary. The Satanist has enough ego strength to use enchantments of her own sexual gratification or gain power. So this is not victim blaming. This is just saying that if someone is constantly asking you out and you're flirting with them, then you should have the personal ego strength to get out of that situation or to stop flirting with them.
All right.
This is just simply describing interactions between people. This is not describing some sort of ritual or magic.
They actually.
So but if you look where it says
this is what this is. This is what they call lesser magic, right? This is the section we're reading here.
It's implied that this is in the context of a sex ritual, which is known as a love charm or spell.
This is how you beguile people. That's what they're talking about. This is how you get someone to fall in love with you, or how you flirt. That's all this is getting at.
Okay, so what you're telling me is just to clarify, what you're telling me is in the context where you're trying to you have a desire to build, where you have a want to build a desire in somebody else, that's just offhand called a love charm or sex spell. And if you have no specific person or mind strong enough to cause a direct sexual
look at the second type. That's the first type. Someone plagued by a relentless suitor. The second type of ritual. This is when they talk about context, Max. This is what they mean. The second type of ritual is of a compassionate nature. The compassion or sentiment ritual is performed for the purpose of helping others or helping oneself. Health, domestic happiness, business activities, material success, and scholastic prowess are but a few of the situations covered in compassion ritual. That's falling in love right there. That's how you long term, basically.
Okay, it's just that this language is very confusing. Like
it's English, man.
Okay,
it's not the Bible. It's
I've ne-
freaking
All right,
English.
what
It was
section are
written
we
in
talking about now?
1966.
I have never heard courtship described in terms of sex rituals, love charms, and spells. I'm sorry. It's
That's
just
what
not
psychodrama is,
Yeah,
man.
dude, have you read, how much of the Satanic Bible have you read?
how much. Bits here and there. Why?
Okay,
Read
read
the
the whole
whole
thing, because the whole thing is like this, where it's using a lot of like liberal language as far as how it describes things, because it talks about, I think it references people as demons. It even says in some areas that Satan likes things, where it doesn't believe that Satan exists. It's speaking metaphorically a lot. Like, so when I'm looking at this passage that you were reporting out earlier, she has no one to blame but herself. We'll just title it that. Where it's referencing psychic vampires, which is a term that the Satanic Bible defines earlier in the text. And then using the word enchantments in place of flirting. Enchanted him frivolously. The context of the paragraph suggests that this means flirting. And considering LaVey's writing style, he was kind of edgy Gothic in the 50s, so it makes sense that he would be writing this way. And then when you read the earlier part of the text where it actually talks about how he developed into this, where he's a fucking organ player at a carnival that hated Christianity and also hated Wicca because he thought that Wicca was too Christian. So like the fact that he's a little edgy and using creative language when describing things and even personifying Satan, even when he's not talking about Satan as a spiritual thing, or rather Satan as the self, or Satan as an idea or an avatar for pride. That's
Dude,
the
Faust
language
was
that he's
this
using.
guy's
He's not
inspiration.
he's not saying that, you know, this woman is enchanting somebody as in actually casting fucking spells. And a lot of it also, his audience were people in the 50s who had been leaving Christianity but still wanted some kind of structured approach, which a lot of those people were Wiccans. So he's writing to the pagan in a lot of the text, to the early, like the 50s Wiccans, which would use a lot of this language. And again, like it's the context of the text, when it was written, who it was written by, and then you're looking at all of this. Now, fault Anton LaVey for not writing like a logic text. He's not writing clearly with there's some things that he writes really clearly, but the whole thing is he uses a lot of creative language because he's writing part of the point of the Satanic Bible is it's really easy read because he's entertaining.
Yes,
and
it's actually quite funny if you read it.
Yeah, he definitely does a lot of tongue in cheek throughout the book. So taking passage that's out of it in a paragraph and then saying that, you know, this is victim blaming because, or that she's casting spells because it says enchantments here, is to misunderstand the text. It's just not what it's intending to say there, especially since earlier on in the book, especially with the foreword that's written by the current head of the church, who was good friends with Anton LaVey, was very close with him for decades. To suggest that he doesn't have any understanding is a little out there. And then on top of that, to take his words and not apply them, because those words at the beginning are supposed to be helping you understand the rest of the text and the style in which it's written.
You got, like Tyler says in the chat, the whole point of the Satanic Bible is it confuses and pisses off the Christians.
I mean, I'm not confused or pissed off. I found this funny.
It is funny. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's intended to be funny. And if you were a Christian in the 50s that was a Protestant, that's like, you know, very the pearl clutching kind of trope is part of the reaction that LaVey was getting, because he was on TV in the 60s and 70s poking at this shit and giving people, like, just being shocking. The fact that this person exists was something that would people were not okay with. And
Then what?
the kind of edgelordy thing that he was doing worked at that point. Him now, if Anton LaVey did all the same things that he did in the 50s, now he would be seen as,
Milo
tame.
Yiannopoulos.
Yeah, there's nothing unique about that.
So what does he mean here then when he says, on the other hand, the Enlightenment man who does not place any stock in such superstitions relegates his instinctive fear of the curse of his unconscious, thereby nourishing it into the phenomenally destructive force that will multiply with each succeeding misfortune. Of course,
I'm losing you. Can you what? Let's go back to the text.
I'll copy and paste what I'm getting at here. So just.
You just jumped somewhere else there. I don't know where you're at.
Yeah, you jumped a couple of paragraphs down. Let's see. Thereby nourishing it.
Remember, this is like something you would see in a circus top 10.
I think this is one of those areas where he's kind of talking about the value of the theater aspect of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so when he says,
to say that you as a common
right,
man are the most
in the paragraph above, he says one of the greatest of all fallacies in the practice of ritual magic is the notion that one must believe in the powers of magic before being harmed or destroyed by them. Nothing could be further from the truth. From the receptive victims, the curses have always been the greatest scoffers. The reason is frighteningly simple. The uncivilized tribeman is first to run to the nearest witch doctor or shaman when he feels the curse has been placed upon him by the enemy. This is making reference to the drama, to the theatric nature of it. That magic as a theatrical curse, when performed by the Satanist, works best on the Christian, especially if it's not real. Because they start to feel some kind of ailment and then they blame the damn curse. It's the theatrical nature of it.
Then why does he say the Enlightenment man is the one really nourishing it? On the other hand, the Enlightenment man who does not place any stock in such superstitions relegates his instinctive fear to the curse of the unconscious, thereby nourishing it into a phenomenally destructive
unconsciousness. So what he's saying here is that basically the curse kind of thinking also works on people that are unbelievers.
Mm-hmm.
The theatrics still plays a role.
But I'm not sure how a non-existent force can play a role in things, in people who don't recognize it.
Okay.
Especially how it...
if you watch a movie and your favorite character gets killed or something like that, you have a reaction, right?
Right, because I've suspended disbelief.
Right, right. When you engage in theatrics, suspension of disbelief happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, and I've, as a pagan, I did this with Christians every once in a while, where, I know that they think a certain thing about me, and then I'll play the role of somebody who's dishing out a curse, and it freaks them out. But it's just the theatrics.
Right.
I have
it's
not
part
actually
of the background of the
have some kind of
psychodrama.
effect, and the effect that it's going to have is because they're buying into it, and then he's what he's talking about here is about the buying into it. He doesn't. The paragraph above is about whether or not they believe it, and he's suggesting that no, it's not necessarily about whether or not they believe it. It's whether or not the drama was effective.
But he says that
because you can have somebody who doesn't believe, but they can get sucked into drama, and then it goes into their unconscious, and then it works again there in a different way than it would for somebody who believes in the curse that's being placed on them.
It's like going into Cuphead, for crying out loud. That's what it feels like.
He's making it more specific. Like, he's saying that not only does it work on the so-called enlightened non-believer, it works even more so. So I'm not sure how that would make sense.
Also, Tyler is pointing out that the contradiction that's apparent here is part of the point, because LeVay is also kind of fucking with the reader. And let's see. Also, and this is a point I brought up earlier, that the text in question is not doctrinal. This is not something that they look to in order to understand reality. This is something that they look to understand LeVay.
Right. So in terms of in terms of understanding the document itself as, some kind of holy book, I'm not even going into it like that. I'm just looking at what the document itself is trying to propagate. I'm not going to say that it claims to be some kind of holy work that Satanists take literally or take as doctrine or meant to inspire doctrine. I'm just
look at the document like
trying to understand what it means.
It's Loki speaking to you. Like it's a trickster. The entire thing is riddled with illusions and half-truths and hidden meanings and text that doesn't creative use of words that don't necessarily entirely reflect what he's actually saying, because he's being artistic in his reflection, like in the case above with the use of enchantment when he's talking about someone who's being flirty.
Right. In the case of all right, so just by bringing up all this, I'm just trying to push the more he does believe some kind of hex thing is going on here. And while you guys are contesting that, my point is it seems that he is saying that there are real world, but the fact that interpretation doesn't really bear out. And the reason I'm just bringing up the contrast between the Enlightenment and the superstitious Christian who's running away to the high priest is just to show that it really bears more of a better understanding of my interpretation. Because if LeVay is trying to fuck with Christians, it would seem odd that he's saying that it's actually more of there's actually more of a repercussion if you're a so-called scoffer, unenlightened.
He's not just fucking with Christians; he's fucking with everybody.
Yeah, of course.
He knew that Christians were going to pick up the book. He knew atheists were going to pick up the book, and he knew that pagans were going to pick up the book. That what?
And apparently feminists were going to pick up the book.
Yeah, that was. Well, no,
he knew everybody was going to pick up the book.
He was very left-leaning for the time. Like, he's definitely radically progressive. And the consent. If you're talking about the consent stuff with respect to feminism, the consent stuff is something that came from, or was already in the BDSM world at the time. And LeVay was heavily involved with BDSM. And BDSM has a lot of consent understandings in it because of the nature of what's being practiced there. If you're active in a scene in which you are going to be, whipping the shit out of somebody, you want to have a conversation about that beforehand, because the whole point of it is that that both individuals involved in this care about each other and they want this to happen, but they need to have an understanding with each other that before it takes place. So
from what I
consent in BDSM settings was much more understood than people that are involved in vanilla relationships. And I think that's still the case. Feminism kind of picked up the language that BDSMers use because it's definitely a lot more fucking clear than what vanilla relationships kind of have used. And if you want to get into the systemic conversation about feminism, it's a lot of men just don't have any fucking idea about the BDSM concept of consent. So it's useful to kind of take it and put it into a mainstream context. Problem is that people get confused by it, or they think it's not sexy.
Right. No, I mean, a few things. One, in terms of Anton LaVey, it seems like he's just going after every kind of moralistic notion of thought here. And in a BDSM context, I think, as even you would, I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but it strikes me as being more prudential, because obviously you don't want to get hurt. you also don't want the other person to get hurt. And of course, if you're going to build some kind of sexual community based off of trust in what could potentially be a very dangerous scenario, you want to be as safe as possible. Seems more prudential than moralistic. Second off, this does, if he is trying to piss off, I mean, just off of this hypothetical understanding, then it seems what's doing the job here is the fact that he is using notions of spells and hexes as standing places for, picking up women or courtship or instilling desire in the opposite sex, because that does give off kind of a rapey vibe. That's all I'm insinuating there. In terms of
what part of it is rapey?
Just the part that I was reading that I just went over.
I think that if that came off as rapey, then you're misunderstanding it. What part of it is rapey?
The part that I read first off, just if you read it as if it was a hex or in the context of
you're not talking about the
So,
girl who finds herself with the relentless suitor situation.
so we see
Tyler.
Tyler Durden, our resident Satanist, has actually arrived. There's like only one of you guys.
Yeah, there's only one of me. I can't make more of me. I've been trying for a while. Anyways, so if you got an IKEA instruction manual and it said step 2 is to hit yourself in the hand with a hammer, would you do it?
Yeah, I'd probably not shop from IKEA, no.
Okay, so if you, for some reason, were given an IKEA item that you had to assemble, and step 2 said hit yourself in the hand with a hammer, would you do it?
No.
Okay. If somebody put that in the IKEA manual, would you think they were maybe fucking with you?
I think it would either be some kind of practical joke or some kind of error.
No, and if in the beginning of that manual there was a foreword that said, hey, I might fuck with you in this manual because I want to make sure you're smart enough to actually own this piece of furniture, would you be looking for people to fuck with you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part?
So let's say this IKEA manual has a foreword and it says, warning, I want to make sure you're smart enough to own this furniture, so I may fuck with you in these instructions. Wouldn't you expect them to be fucking with you?
I would sue that company, mostly because they're expecting one of two things to happen. The first thing was, as they said, to make sure that their consumer was smart enough, or two, expect that some consumers wouldn't be smart enough and hit themselves. I don't think it's safe to put out something where idiots could potentially misread it or would directly misread it and actually hit themselves. I think that is...
Okay, are you going to sue Anton LaVey for trolling people in his book?
I can't.
Or are you going to
He's dead.
deliberately avoid the metaphor?
I can't, he's pretty dead.
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing you need to understand is not only is the Satanic Bible for trolling the uber-sensitive Christians, the Satanic Church is also elitist. So you have to be intelligent enough to be accepted. It's not like the Satanic Temple. There's a little bit of a difference there. And not only that, you have to be able to understand what to take out of the book and what to cast aside. You have to be self-sufficient and responsible for yourself enough to be able to say, well, this part is bullshit, I'm going to cast it out.
Knows this guy?
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So I could actually believe that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is the elitist nature of Satanism is actually to be expected, considering that LaVey was fond of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. I think he even said that his philosophy was essentially objectivism but ritualized. So, fair point. Second point is, you know what? If we're going to say that the Satanic Bible is just fantastic satire, then bravo. I'm there. I can jive with that interpretation.
Yeah, it says that in the foreword. It's kind of obvious. To address the live chat, someone asked what's the difference between Satanism and Luciferians. Generally, Luciferians believe in deities. They just believe that Lucifer was the good guy. And talking about LaVey Satanists or members of the Satanic Temple, they don't believe any of that bullshit is real. Like we understand that gods and monsters and demons and magic are all made up.
But you guys do think that there's psychological power in rituals, don't you?
Well, I mean, I think it's like a metaphoric decompression chamber for yourself, basically.
I think there's psychological power in rituals. Like if you join a Shriner or Masons and you are participating in these rituals that they do, I do think that there's a psychological reason and impact that it can have on you. Just like
Well, yeah.
even something like hazing for a frat boy party.
Aside from the fact that that's pretty much what it is. It's like a big giant fraternity. It's pretty much what Masons are. If you really look at what they do, trying to figure it out, it's not that complicated. Just got to get to know a few of them. They'll tell you what they do.
I actually take rituals seriously in the sense for that reason. So, like, I don't think every ritual has some sort of supernatural effect, but I do think it has a psychological effect on you. It is an affirmation of some sort. So it is something to take serious, I think, in some degree.
So just on my archive copy of this, it says there are 4 introductions, one by Burton H. Wolfe, one by Michael Aquino, one by Burton Wolfe again, and the latest one by Peter H. Gilmore. Then there's a preface and a prologue. Which one of these do you mean is the foreword?
Wait, what?
Oh, I'm asking, where is there a foreword to this book? Because I'm not seeing one. I'm only seeing a preface, a prologue, and 4 introductions. I assume you might mean one of the others. Or you might have a different edition.
Let me go get my version of the book.
Hold on, Tyler. I think I might have it. Are you talking about the one you can get off Amazon? No.
No, I'm talking about the one I linked.
Okay, because like there's one he might be talking about one you can get off of Amazon. Like an actual written book, and that's the one I got because I was actually interested in this when I watched it.
I haven't touched this book in years.
Wait, here it is.
I gotta take off. See, guys.
So maybe this is what you guys mean. The Satanist would only employ the use of a black mask as a form of psychodrama. Furthermore, a black mask does not necessarily imply that the performers of such are Satanists. The black mask is essentially a parody of the religious service of the Roman Catholic Church, but can loosely be applied to satire of any religious ceremony. Okay, maybe that's not it.
I'm seeing that the introduction was written by Gilmore. Is that what you were asking earlier?
Well, no, because like I opened this up and there's this foreword about being called the Black Pope by many of his followers. The way began the road to high priesthood of the Church of Satan when he was about 16 years old. This whole
What
lot
was the
about
publisher of your book?
Avon
Avon?
Books.
Yeah. Then I think that you're looking at an introduction, not a forward.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what forward he's talking about.
Well, open up the book, go to the very beginning, and look at the table of contents. Does it say introduction and preface and prologue?
Yeah, I got that. I'm opening in the adamantium gates.
Yeah.
Is that what you're
That's
talking
Gilmore's
about?
introduction. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You calling it a forward? I just didn't see them calling anything. I was wondering if I was missing a section that actually said forward.
It's an introduction.
Yeah, it's just talking about how he knew Anton and
Met him when he was 13 and all that shit.
yeah.
Well,
Sorry, I had to step away. I don't know what you guys were talking about. I had people come in my office.
oh, there you are. I was just asking what edition of the book you have that has the forward, because I'm using an online copy which has 4 introductions, a prologue, and a pretext.
Oh, I have no idea. It's sitting at home. It's propping up a salt lamp on one of my shelves. So
I think you're talking about what
Because
Gilmore
we've got-
wrote, right?
Is that any way to treat your holy book?
I don't have a holy book.
I know, I'm being sarcastic.
Like
I take good care of my books. No holes in it.
Oh, okay.
it's like what is it? Crowley's Book of Law says you should set the book on fire after reading it.
Oh, Aleister Crowley. Crowley was an idiot.
And then, but he
he was a
was
good
more
cult
of a
leader.
troll than LaVey was with his writing. But at the end of the Book of Law, it says set this book on fire when you read it, and people did it.
We're idiots. That's the whole point.
He was like, no, the point of it is you don't do. God damn it, you're going to set the book on fire because the book told you to.
Yep. It's like a System of a Down's album, Steal This Album. Don't do it. It's a bad idea.
I have
But, like-
actually stolen that album. No, I'm kidding, I didn't. I just have it.
Like everybody always asks, what's Yankee Rose mean? Oh, what's Yankee Rose.
What does
mean?
what mean?
Yankee Rose.
Is it like a rose you grew in New York?
Yeah. I was just looking at the last words of the Bible there.
Rosebud. Anyways, yeah, it's a fucking allegory, so relax.
Apparently Crowley decided to tour India, devoting himself to the Hindu practice of Raja Yogi.
And he also invented a religion and got idiots to buy into it.
That's the dream. To be fair, who else did that? The guy who founded Scientology did that. What's his face?
L. Ron Hubbard, Joseph Smith, Moses.
You actually believe Moses existed? Most atheists wouldn't admit that.
I don't know if he existed or not, but if he did, he was apparently not a good speaker. So what makes us think he was a good writer?
I think Moses didn't exist.
I'm pretty sure you didn't.
I lean towards that one, but I don't give a shit.
Even I think there's actually a Greek biography of his life.
A biography, like written by a person who knew him?
I mean, some biographies today aren't written by people who know the people of the past.
Yeah, sorry if you guys hear noises. I've got a dispatch radio that I have to monitor, and I can't mute fast enough sometimes.
No worries. Oh no, he is present in Hellenistic literature. Let's see.
Moses is?
Yeah.
How do you
Apparently-
write about your own death?
Well, you predict it, you prophesy it, and then you do it.
Yeah, it's
Then after you're dead, you're a prophet and a martyr.
right.
Let's see. He was written about by Artapanus of Alexandria, who lived in Alexandria during the later half of the 3rd or 2nd century BCE.
Well, that's a few hundred years removed, at least. A few thousand, you know?
I mean, we read about people who lived 1,000 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, and Shakespeare wrote about Caesar.
Yeah, he did.
But should we take Shakespeare's Caesar as biographical?
Considering that it was presented in a literary context, no. As it wasn't presented as biography.
But the interesting is, if you're writing your own religion for your own civilization, shouldn't you tell people that you're the chosen one and that you guys have the right God, and that if you don't believe in that one, then it's a trick by the enemy? That's like the perfect setup. That's a perfect groundwork for your propaganda.
Well, I mean, what would you expect him to say? Would you expect him to say something along the lines of, hey guys, got a message from God. All religions are pretty much equal, and yeah, that's basically about it. Keep on being you.
Well, that's what the Vanishavi said. Basically, everyone's religion is just their own personal path, and it all falls within prana eventually anyway, so sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
I mean, yeah, but those tend to be outliers. Also, if you look at a lot of liberal compared to conservative Christian denominations, most of the ones that actually seem to have better longevity are the ones that are very tribalistic, are very aggressive to outsiders. Those are the ones that tend to survive, not the ones that are.
Don't want the congregation thinking for themselves, do you? They're supposed to pay you to do that for them.
Either that, or they want exclusive truth they couldn't reason to themselves over. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of religion. It's supposed to be like, hey guys, here's some special revelation from God that you couldn't have gotten by yourself.
Well, yeah, that's how you keep the peasants in line. That's how the oligarchy keeps power. Only we can talk to the deity. He used to talk to everybody, but he doesn't do that now. And for the proof, here's the book we wrote.
I mean, there was actually no point where God said he spoke to everyone.
Well, God's never said anything. Fictional characters don't actually say things.
No.
The authors say that they said things.
Well, even within the context of the Bible, there was no claim that God spoke to everyone at a certain point of time
at
or
one
age.
point, he did speak to every living person.
Then
he took one of his ribs and made a woman out of it and told him to name the animals instead of trying to fuck the animals. And then he set him up against the ultimate deceiver, because that's a good idea for somebody who doesn't know anything.
A sample size of 2 is not. Well, sample size of 2 is pretty small to say everybody.
That's 100% of people when there's only 2 people.
I mean, if I was to say everybody in the room next to me is blind, that wouldn't be a false statement, as there is no person in that room. It's a trivial truth.
Yeah.
And in any case, yeah. So that's there's really no. So while it's true, it's really just true by way of triviality. You're saying something.
Well, how do you have a
about
relationship with somebody who doesn't talk to you?
I'm sorry?
He doesn't talk to you. It's hardly trivial if he doesn't make himself known.
Well, I mean, isn't Revelation God making himself known?
That's an author writing something.
I mean, I could send somebody carrying a message on my behalf.
Sure. So if you wanted to start a relationship with somebody, what would be the first thing you would do? Would you send them a book that somebody else wrote thousands of years before you were born? Or would you introduce yourself?
I would
just curious what you would do personally.
So that they might believe.
You would do what?
I would endow them with grace so that they may believe.
How would you do that?
Do you know how arrogant that sounds right now?
Do you have supernatural abilities, Max?
Well, I mean, so in the idea of salvation, everyone who comes.
I'm talking about you. You as Max. How would you start a relationship with somebody?
It depends on what powers I have. Well, and if
whatever powers you have now.
I had the power to communicate with people.
Sure. So if you wanted to start a relationship with somebody, wouldn't you introduce
yourself?
yourself?
The most effective way. Well, for me, the most effective way to do that would be communicate with them by means of some medium. Maybe it's a letter. Maybe it's by way of the internet. If I'm close by, I could just pop out and make an appearance. But if I was the Almighty and I want specifically to elect somebody to salvation, wherein we would have a relationship, I would just elect them by means of grace so that they may believe.
Oh no, don't worry about the outcome of the relationship. Just to have any relationship with a person, like a general, like an acquaintance even. Say, oh, I know that person.
I would do it by the most effective means at my disposal.
And what are the most effective means for an omnipotent being?
Endowing grace. I mean, if you are all-powerful, the most effective means would be, hey, here's the grace necessary so that you might believe.
So if an omnipotent being wanted a relationship with people, it would ensure that they knew it existed.
Yes, which is a gift by means of grace.
So it either doesn't want a relationship with everybody, or it is not omnipotent.
It doesn't want a relationship with everyone.
Who does it want a relationship with?
Those he chooses not to elect.
So he wants a relationship with the people he chooses not to elect.
Never said that. I said there are some people who he doesn't want a relationship with.
I said, who does he want a relationship with?
Those he ends up electing.
Does it have to like take time to elect somebody, or can it happen instantly?
The process of the process of election happens throughout the believer's life.
Why? That's not efficient.
Why? Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
you said he would do it in the most efficient way possible. That's not efficient at all. That's time consuming, plotting.
I mean,
That's a lot of pageantry.
What is time to a timeless being?
I don't know. It invented time, so it should be something, right?
It should, yes. It's his creation. He could use his creation however he likes. My point is, however he wants us to come to him is up to his discretion.
Well, you said
And of
that
course-
an omnipotent being would do it in the most efficient way possible.
Yes, I did.
And you say this being is omniscient, right?
Yes. Not,
Is it doing things in the most efficient way possible?
yes.
So taking an entire lifetime to elect somebody is more efficient than doing it instantly.
And I would say so. I mean, consider the fact that he has to do this with reference to not just one person, but multiple people. Or consider the fact that people respond to
It's
grace.
omnipotent.
Yeah, you can do everything instantly. There's omnipotent. Any logical possibility, I guess we're going to go with that one. So why should it take any time for it to complete anything?
Well, how about the fact that the people he elects have to be born?
Do they? It's omnipotent, right?
Yeah, omnipotence doesn't mean God can causally interact with non-existent beings.
So they're non-existent until they're born. There's no spirit before you're born.
No.
Okay, so they're born, right? T equals 1. They've been born.
Oh.
It can elect them right there, right?
Sure.
Well, then that's the most efficient way. You're born, you're elected, you're done.
I hope you don't mind me interjecting.
Actually, I do.
You do?
Yes, because I just wanted to respond to what was said.
I apologize. Go ahead.
Thanks. Well, all right, so the fact of the matter is it's not just them who have to be born, but it's also the fact that that other particular beings have to be born in light of their choices. So, for example, I was born in part because some ancestors in my past were sinners, and of course because also while they sinned, they made certain decisions that eventually led to my birth. If I was in fact elected by God, then it would then follow that part of me coming into existence was not only due to it was due also in part of the fact of when and where people chose to come and were elected by God. So there's that as well.
How do you tell if someone is elected? Is there a test?
No, not really. In fact, there are two categories, as it were. There are those who are elected to the covenant or the church, and those who are elected for salvation. All I know is I was elected for the covenants, in which I was born as, in which I came to the Christian church. But in terms of my salvation or my perseverance until the end, that's another class of people who I don't know if I am a part of. So it behooves me to always act with discretion to obedience and not excommunicate myself by way of committing that mortal sin.
Interesting. Here's a question: is mercy and forgiveness compatible with justice?
That's another question entirely, and I believe Raza Vila wanted to ask something.
Oh yeah, don't let me interrupt somebody.
Hey, we got a Master Chef. Okay. Might get sniped here.
Yeah, Raise a Village, go ahead. I'm gonna mute so you can say your piece.
All right, thanks. My question is to you, and I don't mean this in any like snide way, but my question to you, and if I sound like that, I apologize, is kind of my question to anybody with a complex theology and a complex sort of like the idea of things like well, God does this because that, and he does that because that, and that. My whole question in any of this is, so what is the point? And I don't necessarily think that you can answer
What is the
that,
point of
but
what?
if you're dealing with an omnipotent being, then why? Because it knows what's going to happen.
What's the point of what?
Well, anything, existence, creation, having any sort of plan, etc.
Well, God. Yeah, I mean, I think you're just. This really strikes me as the same problem Sartre raised, which was essentially, if God existed, then I wouldn't be free because everything would just exist to whatever purpose he has. But I am free, therefore God can't exist. And of course, if God knows the future, then obviously I can only will in accordance with that knowledge. So a few things to parse out here. The first is everyone exists for the sake of glorifying God. That is the sake of creation itself, in either the damnation of the sinner or the election of the saved.
Does that not strike you as a little bit arrogant?
No, because God...
Not at all? Like, everything in the whole existence exists for one thing?
Maybe
Yes.
God has a self-confidence issue.
Well, and that kind of gets me back to the what's the point? Because that point is a little bit capricious to me.
Okay, so just to respond to the second point and to the snarkiness, what is God other than that which none greater can exist? It's not, God doesn't, it's not, God's greatness isn't just because, oh, well, I'm so great, therefore I need other beings. God already knows he's great. He's just giving you the grace of basking in his grace.
Max, I've got a question here.
Or the elect.
Don't ever try to sell used cars, Max, please.
Which is greater, a being that requires everything to praise it, or a being that can create everything and sustain everything without requiring praise?
Well, a being that would... Oh, so first off, let's get down on the definition of require. Does he need it, or are we required to do it? If I believe that God requires it to sustain his own being, then obviously not. But if I'm saying that God is so great that he's intrinsically worth worshiping, then obviously such a being is greater than a being who isn't intrinsically worth worshiping. The second being is just garbage. I'm sorry.
We're not talking about anything. We're talking about what it requires its creation to do.
Oh, we're required to do it.
Is an entity that requires creation to worship it greater than an entity that can do all the things the first entity can do without requiring that worship?
Oh, so in that case, then I think we're equivocating, because when I say God requires worship, I'm not saying that he demands worship or that he so wills it arbitrarily. What I'm saying is God recognizes himself as that which none greater can exist. It's a fact of the universe, just like the sky is blue, or 2 + 2 = 4. And
my cat recognizes itself as that which nothing greater can exist either, but it's wrong.
I'm sorry?
My cat thinks it's not the greatest thing ever too, but it's wrong.
Yes, but God is right. It just means that the one being who is wrong and one being who is right.
Well, here's another question about talking about greatness. Which is greater, a being that has to exist in order to do whatever it does, or a being that can do whatever it does without even having to exist at all?
The second one is a contradiction in terms. A being that's non-existent can't causally interact with anything.
Well, then what does it mean to exist?
Let's see, that's a little trickier, but usually it's understood to be a second-order property. The way I understand it can be as a second-order predicate. To say something exists means that there's at least one of such thing.
What does it mean for there to be one of such thing?
So we have, so consider the logical phrase for all x, x is y if and only if something. In essence, when something belongs in a set, it meets a requirement. It meets a list of requirements. Like a soccer ball is, let's say, a ball like this. You could describe its properties.
Right.
Now,
yeah, no, I understand. Let's cut through all that nonsense and let's get right to what is it required to exist.
Okay, it kind of leads into that. My point is, this soccer ball has a list of properties. I can describe this list of properties, but that doesn't mean in and of itself a soccer ball exists. A soccer ball exists if there is one entity in such a set that it makes sense and that it is instantiated. That's what existence means.
What are the criteria for the set exists?
There's at least one thing instantiating the properties.
Okay, so leprechauns, they exist?
No, because I can think of all the definitions. So you could tell me the definition of a leprechaun, but just from the definition, I can't conclude that there's something in the world instantiating the list of descriptors you're giving me.
Okay, so so we're saying a deity exists. What is required for it to exist? What properties must it have?
Well,
aside from there being one of them. That's like saying it exists. So that's synonymous equivocation there. So let's get past that. Let's say what is required for existence.
That's not an equivocation. That's a definition. We have, what is your definition of existence? Let me ask you that.
Oh, to occupy some sort of space for some amount of time.
Okay, so you're essentially defining every
That's just a
immaterial.
working definition. I'm open to yours.
Okay, then let me use mine as a working definition too. I think you're being nitpicky.
No, go ahead. I'm waiting.
Okay. So I gave you my definition. To say something exists means that there is at least one thing instantiating a list of properties. Instantiation is basically
to say something exists is to say something exists. Okay, that's good.
That's not what it. No. You have a list of properties isn't. No, I'm
What
saying.
is the list of properties? I'm asking for the list of properties.
To exist.
The question is pretty straightforward.
Okay. So for something to, let's see, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, and yeah.
Well, I don't have any of those. Do I exist?
No, I thought you were asking for a definition of God.
No. I'm asking for the list of properties required for a thing to exist.
No, I'm not saying there's a. Okay. So one.
Can something exist if it doesn't take up space and it is not extant for any amount of time?
One, there's a set of properties, and one, it has a set of properties, and two, there is by definition, and two, that set of properties is instantiated.
Okay. So just basic set of properties for anything to exist. Can it exist if it doesn't take up any space and is not extant for any amount of time? I don't know how to say that other than that.
Why? Why are those criteria for existence?
Well, those are what I base whether or not something exists on.
Does space exist?
Oh yeah.
What
space
matter is it made?
Occupies all of space.
What matter was it made up of?
Is space? Wait. What matter is it made up of? I didn't say anything about matter. What are you talking about?
You said it takes up. Oh, okay. What time does it take up?
All of time. Space and time are coterminous.
Yeah, they're the same thing.
No, they're not.
What he's talking about is whether or not a vacuum would exist.
Okay, that's a good one.
Like an absolute vacuum? I have no idea. I'm not a physicist. Maybe not.
I think in physics they would be actually vacuums would exist. I think you can causally interact with a vacuum.
It's not something that it's not something that's extant though.
Yes,
it's empty. So
I guess it would take up space and it would be there for time. So sure.
Take up space? I don't think a vacuum takes up space.
I don't think you could have a vacuum without space either.
It's a provision. It's called it's kind of like a hole. It exists as a provision of something. But holes exist, as does but holes exist. This would exist. Even coldness is a pervasion of heat, and yet when it's cold, you can really feel it.
Cold
like
is a comparative state. Cold doesn't exist.
when you're freezing your balls off. I think
You can say it is cold, but that means that your local area of the temperature field is lower than adequate for your normal biological comfort. It's not, cold is not a thing.
So you're saying it, yeah, it's a pervasion of a thing, which is heat. The heat necessary for your biological survival. Or
Oh, yeah, heat is still, even in the Arctic, there is still heat. It's just low.
I'm aware. That's why coldness is a relative pervasion of heat.
Yeah, I guess we're using the different terms to say the same thing.
Yeah, my point is even pervasions can be described as existence.
Well, the whole point was
A cold day.
If you said that it's a logical contradiction for something that doesn't exist to have an effect, and where's logic come from? Actually, is it a thing or is it a prerequisite for anything?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that goes to your philosophy of logic, but I guess my philosophy of logic would just say that the rules of logic are just features of the universe.
Features of the universe. So they were created.
No, never said that. I think they
the universe was created, wasn't it?
I think they pre-exist in the mind of God.
Pre-exist. Okay, so I'm just positing an entity that pre-exists before the mind of God. The laws of logic don't apply to it.
Wait, so you're saying that your idea of a God requires my idea of a God?
No. I'm saying your idea of a God requires the idea of a supra God that I just put forth.
A God who can't do anything. A God
who can do
who is
everything without having to exist.
How?
Through its own nature.
You're saying it can do anything because it can do anything.
Its own nature is that it can do everything that it can do without needing to exist at all.
How?
Therefore, it is greater than the deity that needs to exist in order to do things.
How? At least, does it? I'm not sure you're using the term existent then in any comparable way to anyone, how anyone would understand it.
I think that there are false gods that have accomplished things. If you're going to be looking at religion as an atheist, then there are definitely false gods that have accomplished things.
Yeah, but only because people thought they existed.
Have false gods accomplished things? Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by false god. Like a thing that said it was a god and wasn't a god can do stuff, sure.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about a god that doesn't exist. So let's say that as a Christian you think that Odin doesn't exist, but still the followers of Odin's made accomplishments and give credit to Odin, for example.
Yeah, that's the things making accomplishments. It's like saying that the Ori from Stargate don't exist, but they still manage to do stuff.
Right. They inspire people. They,
Well, sure, that's the people doing it.
Right. The followers are the ones that do stuff.
Yeah, that's the same of any god. The followers are the ones that do stuff.
Yeah.
Like the followers of Christianity are the ones that decide to go.
What I'm saying is that the God doesn't
crusades.
exist, and yet still it seems to have. If it can inspire people without existing.
Oh yeah, I would say that's a
greater
concept.
than something that can inspire people while existing.
And
Yeah, that's a bit different than the entity I was putting forth. The entity I was putting forth can actually do things without relying on anything else.
I was just trying to explain how something could do something.
no, it doesn't just not rely on anything else. It doesn't even exist to have any relation to anything else. To do something implies a causal relationship. But you
only in
can't
this
have
universe. And the deity I'm talking about created the concept of causality in the first place. So it's pre-causal.
So it caused something before causes.
No, it created causality before causality existed.
So it caused cause.
Causality.
No, it didn't cause causality. It created it. This creation, capital C.
This is just this is the argument. I'm sorry.
And if you can't put air quotes around
omni.
it, you can't put air quotes around it. Okay, guys?
Yeah, see, omniscient, omnibenevolent,
Maybe another way to
those
understand.
are all universal level, and when you're supra omni, you can actually circumvent omniscience itself.
So, so what you're saying is this So what you're saying is this hypothetical, non-existent entity has the power to even perform logical contradictions, which would explain its own existence.
Not only that, it is necessary for you to even conceptualize a deity in the first place.
Yep. So,
Okay,
child.
So how do you know this entity isn't just fucking with your mind right now, Tyler?
Oh, there's no way to know anything without it.
So,
Oh,
so
this is presuppositionalism. Oh, great. Okay.
which I was not.
Yeah, that's exactly where it goes.
Which I was not purporting. But in any case, which I would not use myself. But in any case, then it could, in thesis, make you have knowledge and not knowledge at the same time. Anything would literally follow.
Yes, absolutely. That's the nature of omnis.
This is just, how do I put it?
It's not my fault your omniscient God was limited. Mine isn't.
No. I'm pretty sure it's no.
You're limited to logical possibility. How ineffectual is that when you need to make logic itself?
Hey, my God's better than your God.
I never said. No, I never said.
My Omni's better than your Omni.
So
That's why when people say, "Oh, the maximally great being that you can imagine," or the most
My Omni.
great being that you imagine, it's just hilarious because I could easily posit something greater.
This is the actually. I can just say my God has all these super omni attributes too.
But you'd be lying because you already told us
You'd
what
be
your God
lying
was.
because I had first.
No, actually, because my God has all these super omni attributes, he can make me not lie even when I am lying. So
You
there
need
you
to
are.
adopt my worldview to even have that sentence come out of your mouth. Anyway, so I'm accepting of that. That's fine.
Technically, I could have your worldview and not have your worldview, which is fine by me too.
I never understood what was the issue with stealing things from other people's worldviews. I mean, that's an awesome idea. Like, I'm going to steal your worldview and turn it into my fan fiction.
Heck yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
I ate the Bible. I ate the Bible for charity for an atheist once.
It's just being philosophically Roman. Come on.
in any case, the reason why omniscience is usually limited, omnipotence is usually limited to logical possibility is because you do get absurdities that posit from that. It's a self-defeating reductio. And
even if you limit it to logical possibility, I can show you how absurd the entire Genesis story is anyways.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, right? Those are the three properties, the three omnis that this deity supposedly has.
Cool.
So did it know what would happen when it put this mystical tree of knowledge of good and evil where it put it?
Not only did it, yeah.
Could it have put it somewhere else and avoided the outcome?
It could have. Chose not to.
Okay, so then the humans did nothing wrong. There's no reason for them to be punished. The punishment is arbitrary.
No. Just because God could have prevented it doesn't mean he's obliged to. Nor does it
means he chose to make it happen.
Wait. Nor does it entail that humans lose responsibility.
How could they be responsible if they didn't know what good and evil were?
They weren't kicked out of the garden until Adam actually lied to God.
No, I understand that. But they were also told not to eat from this tree, and they didn't know why. They didn't know what disobeying would mean, and they didn't know what lying was.
Clearly they did, otherwise God wouldn't have used those terms.
Did they? Where does it say that?
Knowledge would be the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, what was the point of the tree then?
Describing it.
It's pretty intentional. I mean, so a couple of things. One, usually when you use words, it's because the word is usually because there's an implication that the person is understanding you, or at least you understand that person to be understanding you. Two,
have you ever talked to G-Man?
There's an implication there. It doesn't. First of all, people who talk to G-Man expecting a rational discourse are not smart. And I say this as someone who has talked to G-Man before, a lot, even debated him formally once. Trust me, that's a hard lesson to learn, but it's true. The fact that people just use words with him instead of pictures is, I think that you're already making a mistake there. In any case, in terms of having a knowledge of good and evil, they weren't actually punished until after they had knowledge of good and evil to commit the lie, which they told God. So it's not just. So they were punished. And it was
did he lie? What did he lie about? What's the lie?
Here, I'll tell you the story.
Yes, I know he says that, oh, the woman you made me gave me the fruit. That's not a lie. Hiding isn't a lie because this being is omniscient and omnipresent and omnipotent, so you can't hide from it. It's a natural flight or fight reaction. So where's the lie?
Yeah,
Basically, they were acting exactly within their nature as designed. According to the story, that is, we're ignoring the genetic bottle cap from having only 2 people populate an entire planet.
let's see. Well,
Wait, are you suggesting that they weren't kicked out for eating the fruit?
I'm not just reading the fruit.
Oh, sorry if you guys hear those papers shuffling. Let me mute this while he's looking that up.
I'd also like to bring up that God would be, I mean, regardless of what Adam and Eve did, wouldn't God be ultimately responsible anyway, just for the sheer power disparity?
No.
Well, yeah, he set it in motion.
Well, that was kind of my original point. An omnipotent being knows exactly what will happen if it makes anything, and if it puts an atom here instead of there, and it can choose between the different outcomes. So there's no way that it could be surprised or have anything fail or make a mistake.
Yes, he didn't make a mistake. Adam made the mistake.
No, Adam performed exactly as God intended, if he's omniscient and omnipotent.
No, God didn't. So there's a difference between saying God intended Adam to fail and God determined Adam to fail. And God. There's a distinction to be had. Yeah, there is a distinction to be had from the two. So
I'm sure there is.
All right. Sorry, there's a difference to be had from God wanting Adam to fail and God determining Adam to fail.
Well, right? So everything at once happens.
Not necessarily. So free
Well,
will
he's
would
not
be
omniscient.
no free will. Free will is one of the examples. So just because God would want Adam,
So
to
now you would
choose-
have us presuppose we have free will.
we do have
That's
free
quite
will.
interesting. Do we? How did you determine that?
Well, first off, if we didn't, it would mean that all morality would be arbitrary.
Sure.
Okay. So if you're willing to bite the bullet on that one, then you're already at a loss there. Second thing is knowledge would be, well, pretty much absurd.
Whoa, hold the
So you're just going to
brakes.
say I'm at a loss? What? Okay. Can you back that up a little bit?
Yes.
If we had no free will, you're acting exactly as you would.
It's intuitively obvious that there's some kind of morality
Which
at play
is
with
right now behaving like an odious ass, I might add. For a
Well,
second.
sure. If there is some morality at play, sure. I mean, it seems that way. It could have been determined to see that way.
No, it is that
How
way.
did you show that's not arbitrary?
How? Oh, that's pretty simple. If someone is just determined to perform some kind of action in one way or another, then they couldn't have done otherwise. And if they can't have,
Sure.
couldn't have you ever heard
That's
of
the point.
And you can't show that anyone could have done otherwise other than what they've ever done.
No, my point is, ought implies can. If you ought to do something, therefore you can do something. The notion of a human ought, as in you ought.
So you talk about the present in terms of the past or the future.
What I'm
Which are
talking
you
about.
getting at?
Hold on. I want to hear what he has to say about the ought implying can. That's interesting.
Ought implies can. If you ought to do something, then there's an implication that you can do it.
Well,
Not that-
I ought to be in better shape than I am. I mean, I could have done it maybe if I made the choice in the past, but I can't do that now. I can make choices for the future, but I can't make choices that I ought to have done in the past.
Well, actually, it does mean that in the past you could have made those choices.
Could I? Not
Go
if it
off.
was determined. I couldn't have made any other choices than I made.
Yes, that's my whole point. It means that no one could make any other choices than what they do. And if that's the case, then if you chose to, I don't know, murder a baby, just so you could peel its skin and use it as a lampshade, then what would that mean other than, oh, that person wasn't at fault for anything. Therefore, he ought not to have done that thing.
That's interesting. Well, what if you found out he had a tumor in his brain and that's why he did that shit?
If I found
And they operated, he was completely remorseful of the situation.
Well,
And-
I think we're getting a little hyperbolic and inflammatory with the baby peeling, and we can talk about it in
Yeah.
a second. But
that was
point
kind of the rhetorical flourish there. And to respond to that, if the tumor was so cognitively impairing that he couldn't have done otherwise, then I can't really blame him as a moral agent. But we're not talking about people with brain
You could blame
tumors.
him all you want. It just wouldn't be correct. Like, your
Yeah,
ability
but-
to blame somebody doesn't matter. So in a deterministic universe, what would be different compared to a universe with free will?
Well, for starters, it wouldn't be just to send people to prison for their crimes because they couldn't have done otherwise in a universe with determinism. So
Would we think it was just? Would we still think it was just?
Would we still think it was just?
Yeah, like in this scenario, we don't know if the universe is determined or has free will, but we're just operating from our perspective. So would we still think it's just?
And my response to that, I would say it doesn't matter whether we thought we were just in such a universe or not. We would be wrong in doing. We would still be wrong in doing so.
So we can be wrong in any universe. We're talking about what is actually different.
Yes, and my point is, if we were sending people to prison for acts we just didn't happen to like, then we wouldn't be doing it justly. We would just be doing it based off of the whims of whatever action was done or not, and that would make.
And that happens now.
That would be like. So you're saying really the only reason why we send people who murder babies and peel their skin for lampshades to prison is just because we don't like it. Just like how we.
Did I say that? I didn't hear myself say that. When did I say that?
That is the implication.
No, the implication is we send people to prison for actions we just don't like, such as smoking cannabis, or we used to send people to prison for imbibing alcohol and selling alcohol and prohibition. We used to send people to prison for harboring slaves that had escaped.
Was that
Those
wrong?
were all just because we didn't like them.
Was that wrong?
I think they were wrong, but I would think it was wrong if my universe was deterministic anyways.
Are they wrong? I'm not
I think
asking
they are.
what you think.
Oh, I am a moral non-cognitivist. I don't believe that
so-
moral positions are right or wrong, and I don't believe legal positions have moral implications. Well, so far as that you don't decide legal implications by the moral implications.
Yeah, legal positivism. Okay, so if that's the case, then your problem is with the morality of the whole thing, not necessarily with the existence of free will or not.
No. I don't have any problem with morality at all. People have their
In this case, if you are a moral,
the point is, you're not offering any distinction between the universe that is determined and the universe that has free will that we can observe. There's no distinction we can
the
detect.
distinction is in the moral properties, and as for moral non-cognitivism, I would say that's
When you have a metric to illustrate that moral properties of correct and incorrect moral dictates exist, then we can talk, I guess, but I don't think you have that metric.
I think we do have that metric, so heads off.
So how do we determine if a moral statement is true?
Yeah, that requires a particular methodology, or
Yeah, that's what I said.
and I would just advocate something like let's see. I drift between moral systems at times, but the one I would be most apt to defend here is I don't know, let's say a natural law theory. It seems to me that things have specific ends, and the moral dictates would be measured by how well something is aligned to those ends. So
You're breaking up really hardcore.
all right. So everything has natural ends and basically morality. How do we determine what is good or not lines up with those particular ends? So, for example,
the word you're saying at all.
testing, 1, 2.
You're coming in fine. Tyler, I think it's your end.
Yeah.
Is it me? I'll refresh. Might be. My phone's doing weird stuff. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I was hearing you just fine too.
Same.
Awesome.
No, but it's good to get Tyler in here.
Well, so far I've enjoyed it because Tyler, welcome back. You've hit on any points that I would, think of anyway. So I'm just kind of sitting back like, okay, I'm just going to chill.
Well, and that's what Satan is. It's his adversary. It's the
I
psychodrama
know.
of the adversary.
Yep. The shining prince of light, the candle in the darkness,
Yeah, no, it's
the
pretty hard.
advocate of the underrepresented.
So the one who doesn't think there's anything objectively wrong with skinning babies alive for their skin as lampshades.
Where has Satan ever done that? That's crazy.
No, I'm not-
Where was that written?
Crazy.
I never said he did that. What I'm saying is,
You just
There-
implied it.
Yeah, so where does it say he thought that? Have you just slandered the Dark Lord?
well, to you, he doesn't exist. I'm just attacking the symbolic head of your ideology.
Well, sure. If you can offer any evidence that Satan thinks that, that would be great. But I mean, have you even read his version of the events?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're pretty unreliable.
Are they? Why would they be unreliable? Has Satan ever told a lie?
Let's see. There's the whole father of all lies title he has. So there's
Well,
that.
sure, but then again, Hitler said that Eisenhower was a demon coming to drink the blood of German babies.
He also said that. Oh, what else did he? I mean, he also said that there would be no harm in taking and eating the fruit of the garden. So there's that one too.
Is that what he said? That's not what he said at all. He said that they wouldn't immediately die and they would become like God and know good from evil, which apparently happened.
No, they
And
didn't.
if that was Satan, that was a serpent. I don't know if that was Satan.
It says in the book of Revelations that he was the serpent of old. Second of
Yeah,
all,
that's
second of all, they didn't become
idiom.
God. Second of all, they didn't become God. Third of all, they did die. They
Become
wasn't,
like.
and he didn't even say immediately. They were in the garden. They were immortal.
Were they? Where does it say that?
It was correct.
Why was there an issue with them eating from the tree of immortality or whatever the hell it was called?
Yeah.
Well, because death is an imperfection, of course. To say
Is
that
it?
God would directly, yes, it is. And to
Why?
say that God,
Why? Wait, whoa! You're getting crazy here. Why is death an imperfection?
The tree of life was given to Eden later.
yeah,
Well, it
because
was also given to the Hesperides,
because-
but that's another story.
because life is a perfection over death, and if you don't believe me there, then people wouldn't have so much trepidation over killing themselves. So
Well,
there's
some people don't. But can any life exist
No.
without death?
not rational person. Yes, life exists in spite of death.
Wait.
Wait,
What
without death.
do you mean
That's a
rational?
Without death.
Death. This is
I mean, what is the soil if not dead things?
Well, I'm just wondering how you digest food. Like, what did they eat?
Oh, I thought you meant what is. Oh, I thought you were speaking about human death,
Well, I'm
particularly.
saying death.
But
death.
if we're equivocating on this matter,
Are we equivocating with the word death now? What does death mean? Death doesn't just apply to humans, does it?
death is in the Hebrew context sort of applied to just animals, not plants or fruits.
Okay, so animals, like the class Animalia, or like non-plant things?
I think in class of animals it would just mean things which move.
So bacteria.
Not bacteria. So let's see.
Some plants move.
So the classical Aristotelian definition would have been something along the lines of just any kind of self-moving entity. Something that is in a sense sentient, can think and has some cognitive capacity, that sort of thing.
So we've eliminated jellyfish for sure. They don't even have a central nervous system. So
Okay.
we're building up here. So
Yeah.
higher life forms.
Well, I'm not. So I'm only suggesting it in the terms of how the Hebrews would have used the term.
Okay,
Not
we can throw out Aristotelian logic. So what did the Hebrews mean by death when they wrote that?
Clearly, it was supposed to imply the death of human beings, because at that point, that is when death came to them.
So so everything else could die before then. Just human beings were the ones that couldn't die.
Whether that applied to other animals or not, I'm not sure.
I'm talking about a spiritual death here.
Some people interpret that as a spiritual death as well. That's also one possibility. In either case, the point is the consequence of death, whether spiritual or not, befell human beings, contrary to the father of all lies.
So you keep calling him that, and a lot of people like to call him that, but that's kind of like slandering your political opponent, isn't it?
No, it's true, because he told the lie that led to the fall.
Isn't the father of all lies?
Yeah, because he told the lie that led to the doom of all of humanity.
Well, who made the father of all lies? If the father
Yeah.
of all lies exists, who made
That'll
the
be
father
the father
of all
of the
lies?
father of all lies.
Well,
So
right.
the omnipotent deity knew that this being would be the father of all lies and exactly what it would do if it made it in the way he made it, and it still made it.
Yeah, because
So
your Lord and
technically-
Master. Yeah, because the Lord and Master, a lot of Satanist fanboys, fawn over is a total bitch. Every time he tries to.
He seems to be winning.
No, actually, he's not, and for a good reason. The only reason God allows him to operate in the world as it exists is because he uses his evil to bring about a greater good, thus
So
infuriating
your
him more.
propaganda says, but wouldn't you write that about any enemy you couldn't defeat?
Oh, please. The idea that
Because wouldn't you do the most efficient thing if you were omniscient and just blink it out of existence?
now
That's
Satan
crazy.
is actually Satan is actually the most irrational being if you think about it. He's up against an omnipotent God, and yet at the same time, he's allowed to operate, and yet he does evil for its own sake. He's not going to win. He knows he isn't going to win. He just
I
keeps
still
on
don't know
doing
what evil
despite
Satan's ever done. That's
I don't-
crazy.
I'm trying to find this evil you speak about. I really am.
Yes, because
Because-
obviously there's nothing really wrong with skinning up a baby.
Nobody ever
Yeah,
did that.
Where
It's-
did
Yeah,
Satan ever
usually
do
that's
that?
the
I mean, come on.
implication of your view. No, that is the logical implication of your worldview. I'm sorry.
Well, I
I've
think if you
never
read,
seen any devil do any
You
evil
are
thing.
strawmanning the crap out of him. I'm telling
I
you.
think
right
if you
now.
read the
That's
Satanic
messed
Bible, you would
up.
know it's explicitly against our doctrine to harm another.
So it says.
Yeah, that's what it says. That's what our book says.
So it says
I mean,
in there.
we're not
No,
even
I'm-
talking bad about your deity at all. We don't even say anything other than, hey, we helped support it. We helped it. We were
Actually,
good employees.
Sorry, but from the last 10 minutes of this discussion, it's just been logical contradiction in the Bible. Hey, answer this, play apologist for that. It seems
I haven't slandered anyone, and I'm just responding to the hideous
No, but-
idea of skinning a baby for a lampshade. That's insane. Why would you think of that?
No, because it perfectly illustrates the point. If you have a system that can't capture the perversity of such an action, then you have a
My
failing.
system is
Yes.
explicitly against it. It says, don't do that.
Yes.
That's bad.
It says don't do that.
No, it doesn't say don't do that. It just
It does.
no.
Should I
From what,
pull up my
from what
PDF and code it? Where did it
from
go?
what I remember, that book isn't doctrinal. Second off, you said it yourself that
Is there a
nothing.
doctrinal satanic
No, wait.
I'm
Hold
saying
on.
nothing
Bible
here,
out
doctrine.
there?
Hold on.
That's just silly.
Hold on.
This is written by
Hold on,
Anton
hold on.
Sanders Bay,
It's
right?
not doctrinal. It's not doctrinal from what I was told. Second of all, I'm only responding to the to the implication of moral cognitivism that Tyler was espousing. That is what I was responding.
Okay.
While the Satanic Bible itself would push against such a thing, if one's worldview is based off of a moral non-cognitivism, then there is nothing inherently wrong with
That's not what moral non-cognitivism is. It's that there are no moral truths. Morals are not fact statements. It's not that there is no right and wrong. Right and
No,
wrong
that's not-
are labels that we
That's-
apply to actions.
That is actually not true. That would be moral fictionalism. The difference is moral. So one could be a cognitivist about moral statements, but claim that they're all false. Or that's error theory. Sorry. Or one can be a non-cognitivist and say that really moral statements are something akin to boo, murder, baby murder, or yay, giving to charity. They're not something that are truth apt or false apt. Whereas that's non-cognitivism. Whereas error theory just says all moral statements are false. So if I was to say skinning a baby is morally wrong, then such a statement would be false. Contrary, if I said morally skinning a baby was true or good, good, then that would also be morally false as well.
And the
but point
non-cognitive
is-
position would be applying true and false to that statement is incorrect.
Yes, that's what I said.
It's not. It's like saying cake is pie.
Well, that is you can apply truth or falsity to that, but that's false. I mean, to say I mean, that's a contradiction, and that's false because it would entail a contradiction in definition. At least knowing from what I know what cake and pie mean.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. I misspoke there. That would be like saying cake is fine, not pie. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is cake fine? Is that true or false? Who knows?
If you would have to mean, I'd have to know what you mean by fine. But if by fine you mean tastes good,
Can be acceptable for the situation, or it could be aesthetically pleasing. Either way, it's an opinion. It's not a true false statement.
oh, actually, I think aesthetically it's going to be true or false. And I do think that there are objective aesthetic properties as well. But just to speak about aesthetic moral claims being true or false, if you're going to reject that, you're also going to have to reject logical claims being true or false as well.
Why would I do that? That's crazy.
Oh, okay, simple.
You keep saying the things I have to do, but I don't understand why.
All right, I'll go into the argument. First off, in a discussion, we have certain expectations for ourselves. So if you were to present a logical syllogism, for example, if P then Q, P therefore Q, the implication of Q is something you would have to accept your opponent. It's something you would expect your opponent to accept, as that's what the rules are of logic. If P therefore Q, P, then you ought to accept that Q is going to follow as well. Likewise,
If the first two premises are correct, yeah.
If the first two premises are correct. But someone could say, okay, why ought I accept that?
Well, that's a question of why should you take an action, not whether or not it's fact.
Why ought I regard it as factual? You could phrase it too. There's
Sure,
kind of
that has nothing to do with whether or not moral statements have fact value or truth value.
okay, but can you say something about moral statements that you can't really say about this state of affairs as well?
Yes, they don't have fact value or truth value.
Yeah, but why don't they?
Because they're based on opinion.
I could say logic is based off opinion too.
That would not be a very good form of logic.
That's not very logical to say.
Why not?
Logic, is it?
Although you might be talking about my super omni deity, in which case, all right.
I'm not.
I'm glad you can see the point.
Putting the omni deity to the side, that doesn't answer my question.
That does go quite well back to the omni deity, by the way.
It actually doesn't, because you're not. Because I could be an atheist and making the same points. Why?
It does because it's 1 o'clock in the morning here.
So why should you accept the
It's
Why-
a good place
why
to
does-
stop the live
why does-
broadcast.
mystery?
Why does Q follow from? Why would Q follow
Wait,
from
wait,
the truth
wait,
of
wait.
and if P therefore Q?
Oh, why would it follow? I have no idea why it would follow. I thought we were talking about why you should accept it. So we
Yeah,
keep bouncing
why-
between what you should accept or what you should do, and then what actually is the case. Which one do you want to go with?
Let's go with why ought I accept it.
Oh, because it's a reasonably reasonably reliable way of interacting in reality. Like, I don't care if you accept it or not. That's up to you. It makes you easier to talk to. But
So you're saying it's an empirical. It has an empirical basis.
does it? I don't know. It depends on what we're talking about, I guess.
You're speaking about reliability, but when I measure reliability, that's based off of measuring instances where something works and then saying, "Oh, it works." It's just a dependable system because we've always employed its use in the past before. So, are you saying that there's an empirical basis for logic? No, and that's the reason why we accept it.
The reason why we accept it. I thought we were talking about why you should.
Okay, why you should accept it.
Why you should accept? I don't know why you should accept it. Maybe you could accept it based on the empirical validity of certain logical forms, but that's up to you.
Okay. So I can make up my own system of logic called modus dumus, where P therefore Q, Q therefore P. And I'd say that's my system of logic, and those are just the rules of modus dumus. Now, of course, everyone would realize that that's affirming the consequent, which is traditionally taken as a logical fallacy, but on my own system of rules, that's a-okay. That doesn't. My point is, under this understanding, you could just as easily subjectify as logic itself.
Which still has nothing to do with whether or not moral statements have truth values.
Actually, it does, because if you're going to reject moral statements for having truth statement, for being truthful or not, then by the same token, you should reject logical. You should also reject logic based off of this as well.
What logic is based off the truth value of moral statements?
No, I'm saying you can't give a reason why you should accept the truth or falsity of logic that you can't do for morality. If you're going to reject one, you're going to reject the other. I'm saying you can't do both consistently.
Okay, so give me a syllogism that proves a logical truth. Is that what we're doing? Are we saying that you can use a syllogism to show that a moral statement is true?
No, what I just said was you can't give me a reason for rejecting. You can't give me a reason for why I ought to accept a form of logic that just like while at the same time rejecting morality, or rejecting morality as a way of doing so.
Logic reliably provides truth, reliably provides information with a truth value based on reality, and moral statements don't.
Okay, so you're saying what justifies logic is some kind of empirical basis, because that's how we gauge reliability.
I don't know if
Right.
that justifies logic, but I'm saying that's why you should accept one and reject the other one.
So how do you know logic is reliable?
I can test it.
Okay, so it's an empirical basis.
Part of it might be, sure.
No, that's completely a testing. When you repeatedly test something, that is empiricism because you're using your senses.
Sure, but I'm not going to make a blanket statement saying that it is empiricism across the board. That'd be crazy.
All right, so in part it's empiricism, but
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay, cool. Now, but here's the thing, though. Logic is supposed to be something which is 100% factual. That is to say,